due to have Sinn Féin with us, but they pulled out with 15 minutes to go. So that's rather sad, but there we go. That's live radio for you. Now, I think we have three audiences tonight. One is here in Northern Ireland, and I know our listenership here has grown significantly over the last couple of years. The second is in the rest of the United Kingdom, who I don't think are very well served on Northern Irish issues by the UK media. And the third is our audience down south in the Republic. And I know we have a lot of listeners there too. So we're doing a running phone-in with our five guests. You may want to put an opinion or a question to one or all of them. Specify that when you ring in. Now, the number to call, as you know, 0345 6060 973. And there are lots of issues we'll discuss over the next 3 hours, not least Liz Truss's announcement in the Commons this afternoon on the Northern Ireland Protocol. But what about other issues? North-South relations, the possibility of a border poll, is reunification on the horizon, social issues, the economy. Basically, you're going to drive the agenda on this. Now, in a moment, we're going to be talking to the former Northern Ireland First Minister from the DUP, Edwin Poots. He'll be with us from 7:30. At 8 p.m, we'll be joined by the youngest ever member of the Northern Ireland Assembly, Eoin Tennyson from the Alliance Party. At 8:30, it's the turn of the leader of the Ulster Unionist Party, Doug Beattie. And at 9, it's Brandon Lewis, the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland. And last but not least, Matthew O'Toole. He's an SDLP MLA, and that's the Social Democratic and Labour Party. Now, first of all, though, let's concentrate on what Liz Truss was saying in the House of Commons today on the Northern Ireland Protocol. That's been big news here in Belfast, not just over the last few days, obviously for a very long time. But Boris Johnson was here yesterday to try to convince the DUP to allow a new executive to be formed, but they were absolutely adamant that they wouldn't do so until the protocol was either heavily amended or scrapped altogether. Well, today Liz Truss outlined in the House of Commons some legislative measures that she intends to take if they cannot come to a new agreement with the European Commission.
I am announcing our intention to introduce legislation in the coming weeks to make changes in the protocol. Our preference remains a negotiated solution with the EU, and in parallel with the legislation being introduced, we remain open to further talks if we can achieve the same outcome through negotiated settlement. I've invited Vice President Šefčovič to a meeting of the Withdrawal Agreement Joint Committee in London to discuss this as soon as possible. However, to respond to the very grave and serious situation in Northern Ireland, we are clear there is a necessity to act to ensure the institutions can be restored as soon as possible. The Government is clear that proceeding with the bill is consistent with our obligations in international law and in support of our prior obligations in the Belfast Good Friday Agreement. I am announcing our intention to introduce legislation in the coming weeks to make changes in the protocol.
And Sir Geoffrey Donaldson is the leader of the DUP. Here's part of his exchange with Liz Truss.
From the outset in this House, the DUP warned about the consequences of this protocol, and that's why we opposed it from the beginning, because we recognised the political and economic instability it would cause and the harm it would create for the Union itself. The statement today is a welcome, if overdue, step. That is a significant move towards addressing the problems created by the protocol and getting power sharing based upon a cross-community consensus up and running again. Therefore, we hope to see progress on a bill in order to deal with these matters in days and weeks, not months, and as the legislation progresses, we will take a graduated and cautious approach. We want to see the Irish Sea border removed, and the Government honouring its commitment in the New Decade New Approach Agreement to protect Northern Ireland's place in the UK internal market. The statement today indicates this will be covered in the legislation to bring about new revised arrangements.
What everybody in Northern Ireland agrees on, all parties, is that the Northern Ireland Protocol is not working. And we don't have cross-party consent to move forward. I think it's vitally important to restore the primacy of the Belfast Good Friday Agreement, which provided for power sharing in Northern Ireland to ensure we have the consent of all communities. And it is the government's priority, above all else, to make sure that we protect peace and stability in Northern Ireland. That is our first duty as the sovereign government of the United Kingdom.
And Conservative MP Simon Hoare chairs the Northern Ireland Affairs Select Committee.
The first duty of government is to uphold the law. If it tries to bob and weave and duck around that duty when it's inconvenient, if government does that, then so will the governed. And then nothing is safe, not home, not liberty, not life itself. Not my words, but Margaret Thatcher's. Respect for the rule of law, Mr. Speaker, runs deep in our Tory veins. I find it extraordinary that a Tory government needs to be reminded of that. Could my right honourable friend assure me that support for and honouring of the rule of law is what she and the government is committed to?
Well, I can assure my honourable friend that we are committed to upholding the rule of law. We are clear that this bill is legal in international law, and we will set out the legal position in due course.
Well, you will recall listening to Liz Truss there, where she said that what everybody agrees on in Northern Ireland is that the protocol isn't working. That is simply not true, is it, Ben Kentish, LBC's Westminster editor?
Well, it's certainly not working according to the DUP. They are the sort of key players once again, Ian, in some senses here. They're the ones refusing, as you touched on, to come and form an executive with Sinn Féin at the Stormont Assembly. Liz Truss making the claim in the House of Commons today that the government here doesn't want to rewrite the whole protocol and he wants to rewrite certain parts of it, but they're pretty significant parts. For example, they relate to the main issues that the EU has long been worried about, the transfer of goods from Great Britain to Northern Ireland and the sort of checks that are carried out on them to make sure that they don't enter the EU single market via the Republic of Ireland without the right checks and customs and so on being carried out and imposed. So this is a very, very sensitive issue, and of course it goes without saying what the UK government is effectively saying today is if there's no agreement with Brussels in the days to come or the weeks to come, they will simply give up on talks and legislate unilaterally to change parts of the protocol that is in the international agreement made with the EU just 2.5 years ago. Brussels is obviously not happy. The Republic of Ireland is obviously not happy. But the UK government says, look, the protocol was always meant to be adapted. It was always meant to be changed and reviewed if it was causing disruption or threatening the Good Friday Agreement. And they say that no responsible government would allow what's going on now, Ian, to happen without acting if they need to by themselves.
I think a lot of Tory MPs think they've acted a little bit too quickly, that there's a long bit of mileage to go in the negotiations with the EU. Why have they decided to do it at this point?
Well, the reason that's been given, Ian, is that the pressure and the need to solve this issue has intensified following the elections in Northern Ireland that, of course, delivered a Sinn Féin as the biggest party, because now the DUP saying they won't form an executive. What the government in London says, unless we solve the protocol, it's now become the barrier in some senses to restoring self-government and stability in Northern Ireland. So they say that means there's a fresh imperative to sort this out. But as you say, some Conservative MPs do think that even while the government may in time follow through on this promise, this pledge, this threat, whatever you want to call it, that ultimately the first objective of it is to try to convince EU member states to give their negotiator, Maros Sefcovic, a new negotiating mandate to back down effectively, to do what the UK wants and agree to completely rewrite the protocol. But as things stand here, no sign from Brussels at all that they're willing to do so.
Thank you very much, Ben. 0345 6060 973. Welcoming your calls on the protocol or indeed any other aspect of Northern Ireland politics. We're delighted to welcome Amanda Ferguson, LBC's Northern Ireland correspondent, into our little pop-up studio here. Amanda, we've talked many times over the years. We've never actually met, so it's lovely to see you in person.
Welcome to Belfast.
Thank you very much. Now, the protocol, is this the subject on everybody's lips down the proverbial dog and duck, or are there other issues that actually we ought to be concentrating on tonight as well?
No, it's not. it was very clear during the election campaigns, whenever I was out on doors with the parties talking to members of the public about what was exercising them, it really was the cost of living crisis, the price of petrol, the price of their electric bills, their gas bills, the health service waiting lists. Like, Northern Ireland has the worst waiting list in the UK, so they were all definitely issues on the door. The Unionist political parties would have told you that the protocol was a really hot ticket issue on the doors. That was correct within some Unionist doorsteps, but all the other parties were saying, look, this isn't coming up for us. If it was, we would tell you about it. We know that the blockage is there at the moment because the DUP is using the leverage that it has not to reform devolved government at Stormont. But it's very clear that the Northern Ireland is a unique part of the UK. It has unique arrangements. It's on a separate island from Scotland and England and Wales. It has an invisible land border with the Republic of Ireland, which remains an EU member state. So the reason that people are talking about the protocol a lot now is because it's getting in the way of getting the devolved institutions back up and running.
Now, in my adult life, there's never really been a serious discussion about unification or reunification, but it does seem to be back on the political agenda. Just take us through how that's happened.
Well, it's become something that's been discussed every year of my life that I've been here, and it dominates the local airwaves and what the future of Northern Ireland is. Brexit has accelerated all of those conversations because it's made people think about where their future lies. Do they want to get back as part of the EU, as part of a new Ireland, as it's being described? I think that one of the issues that, overarching over all of this is the fact that the demographics of Northern Ireland are changing, that the political landscape's changing. We've had the first Irish Republican now fronting the largest party in Northern Ireland. That is a huge dent to some Unionist psyche, because for the first time in the history of Northern Ireland, which was created over 100 years ago with an inbuilt Unionist majority, that is a new thing for people to have to digest. Now, the Good Friday Agreement's very clear. The constitutional position of Northern Ireland remains as it is. It remains part of the United Kingdom unless and until people on both sides of the border, both jurisdictions on the island of Ireland, would vote any differently. But what we're seeing is that in crude terms, the demographics are changing. The older part of the population is more likely to be from that British Unionist tradition, whereas the younger part of the population more likely to be from that Irish Catholic Nationalist Republican, however you want to describe it, kind of background. So obviously they're going to be the next batches of voters, and the people at the oldest end of the demographic aren't going to be around forever. So I think that no matter what happens, whether Northern Ireland remains part of the UK or whether a new Ireland is created, there's still going to be considerable chunks of people in this part of the world that have different ideas about what their identity is, and they're both going to have to be accommodated. And I think a lot of the sort of uneasiness around the protocol is that while it's an economic trading arrangement, Unionists are concerned about what it means for the constitutional position, what it means for the politics of this part of the world.
The interesting thing in the elections, or one of the interesting things, was the rise of the Alliance Party, which is non-sectarian, it's non-nationalist, not unionist, it's sort of in the middle, if you can be. And I think they've got a much younger demographic voting for them. Is that a sign of things changing? Well,
the way that it's split in now is around sort of 40% Unionist, 40% Nationalist, 20% other, as it's described. People have a sort of inaccurate analysis of the Alliance Party, that it's a small U Unionist party, that it doesn't attract cross-community support, when it clearly does. There are people who are within Alliance's representatives, within Alliance's voter base, that would consider themselves Irish Republicans. Some would consider themselves British Unionists. Some don't care about it at all. Some people could be persuadable on a border poll, and some people are undecided on it. So the others, as they're described, don't feel the need to vote on sort of constitutional lines, because they know that the only vote that counts whenever it comes to that is going to be the border poll. And I think that it's going to be increasingly important for people who want a new Ireland or who want to maintain the Union to woo and court and appeal to that middle ground, because they're going to be the people that decide a border poll in the future. And I think that some people were taken aback at the surge in the Alliance vote, I was constantly trying to say to people, watch out for what happens to Alliance. It's going to be Sinn Féin DUP Alliance. Alliance are going to do really well. I didn't expect them to wipe out the Green Party, but it just shows that they're taking votes from everybody, and they're now, instead of a sort of small fifth largest party, they're demonstrating there's a growing trend in support for them, and they're going to be increasingly important.
Well, lots more to talk about. We're going to go to your calls in a moment. 0345 6060 973, and then at 7:30, Edwin Poots, the former leader of the DUP, he's going to be joining us for half an hour for an interview and indeed to also take your calls. 0345 6060 973, and don't forget you can watch us also for the whole 3 hours on Global Player.
Leading Britain's conversation. Iain Dale. Tweet at LBC.
22 minutes past 7 on LBC. We're coming to you live from Belfast for the whole show this evening. When I said earlier that I thought there were 3 audiences that we really want to get calls from this evening, as I was saying, I thought, no, there are actually 4. I said people from Northern Ireland, people from the rest of the United Kingdom, and people from the South, people from the Republic of Ireland. But of course, I forgot people all over the world, because there is such a massive Irish diaspora, isn't there, Amanda Ferguson, all over the world, who really follow what's going on back home. And our first caller is from Houston, Texas. It's Kieran. Hello, Kieran.
Talk to you.
Hi, what would you like to say?
I just touching on something that you talked about during the week. Moving forward, how is it going to be sustainable for the London government to overrule the pro-protocol opinions of the majority of the people of Northern Ireland on these issues?
Do you not think that they've slightly softened their line over the last few days? Because they were threatening to axe the protocol altogether, whereas if you read Boris Johnson's article in the Belfast Telegraph yesterday, you listen to what Liz Truss said in the Commons today, they're talking about amending it and tweaking it rather than outright abolishing it. So I think there has been a little bit of a change, don't you?
Well, who knows? They make stuff up as they go along, but she said a lot of stuff that we picked up was terrible. She was extremely disingenuous, talking about a poll and majority of change to the protocol. The fact of the matter is we had a serious poll last week, which is called an assembly election, and 60% of those elected are pro-protocol. Yeah. So she was basically trying to push that to the side. It was extremely disingenuous, and none of us were fooled. I just wanted to say also to the listeners that this isn't a green and orange issue. You know, as you mentioned yourself, the Alliance Party are there in the middle. They're non-sectarian, and they're right behind a lot of the other parties in saying the protocol was sort of our minimum position. You know, we took a hit accepting Brexit without violence, without demonstrations, and we took that and accepted it as read. But the protocol was like a minimum position we would accept, and now even it is under threat because the tail has to wag the dog. You know, the days of Unionist veto have to be over, and to, you know, misappropriate the Good Friday Agreement, you know, use Good Friday Agreement language to talk about basically a Unionist veto when the only consent there is for the constitutional position. That's the only part of the GFA which talks about consent.
Up to a point, because as you say, the Good Friday Agreement does talk a lot about consent, and clearly the DUP, they say on behalf of Unionists, do not consent to the protocol. But then again, you could argue that Northern Ireland didn't actually consent to Brexit, given that it voted against it. So there are lots of different nuances here. But would you agree, Kieran, that all of the parties in their manifestos at the elections pointed out that there were problems with parts of the protocol, not the concept of the protocol, but there were things that weren't working? So surely it's right for the UK government to try to renegotiate those with the European Commission.
And there's mechanisms within the protocol already, the Joint Committee, to actually solve those problems.
But they're saying that the EU aren't playing ball with that.
And then Liz Truss was disingenuous again today when she said she'd been in constant negotiation, and I understand the last time she met Europe was in February, and it's May.
Well, to be fair, I think they both agreed that they would put the talks on hold while the Ukraine crisis was going on. So that you can't blame that one on Liz Truss. But these talks have been going on between David Frost, Brandon Lewis, and Maros Sefcovic over the past 18 months. And
you need a good faith partner. And if you see a government here, you're about to basically unilaterally break international law. I mean, if they can't hold the contracts which they negotiated over, 5 years? You know, what real difference does it make if they come back, demanding more?
Well, you say you need a good faith partner, but it does take two to tango, doesn't it? And the European Commission so far been incredibly inflexible.
But there was 5 years of negotiations there, and at the end of the day, if Britain didn't want to sign that agreement, nobody held a gun to their head.
No, but there's no international agreement that is set in stone. If something doesn't work, and clearly there are aspects of it, I'm not saying the whole thing doesn't work, there are aspects of it where there are Northern Ireland companies who feel that they are suffering. There are companies in the rest of the United Kingdom that feel they are suffering from it. So therefore, what is wrong with saying to the European Union, yes, of course we signed this, but there are bits of it that we want to change. Will you help us make it work better? And so far, the government says that the European Commission have been very inflexible.
Well, again, are they saying that because of they're actually they mean that, or is it they're just trying for another battle with Europe to deflect from domestic politics?
You in this conversation so far? We've been talking for 5 minutes, and you're blaming the British government for every single thing. Do you not feel that the European Commission could have been a little bit more flexible?
I think they were very patient for a long time. They spent forever waiting on the British government to basically decide on what the questions were. If you remember all the shenanigans in Westminster, all these sort of representative votes. So they stood there and they waited for a British government which had a majority to come forward and negotiate with them. And they took full part in those negotiations. We keep getting back to the same point as if Britain didn't like that deal, why sign it? And we all know is the reason they signed it is because Boris Johnson needed to get elected.
Yeah. So I'm not disagreeing with you on that. I'm just saying we are where we are. Even the Sinn Féin and the SDLP and the alliance parties recognise that there are faults within the protocol. So logic would therefore surely dictate that it needs to be changed. And therefore, they've asked the European Commission to change it. I mean, it is preposterous, isn't it, that a lorry that comes over from Great Britain, from Sainsbury's, to come to Northern Ireland has to fill in all of these sort of 800 pages of papers or whatever, because none of the goods in those lorries are going to go to the Republic because there are no branches of Sainsbury's in the Republic. So surely that's a simple example of where it wouldn't hurt the EU to just be a little bit more flexible, would it?
I think Maros Šefčovič and even the Irish government, Simon Comey, has actually talked about that this week, that there was a landing zone available. But again,
well, they keep saying that, but they don't actually lay out the runway, do they?
Well, again, the EU did present papers to the UK government, which they actually haven't responded to, as I understand. And then Lord Frost, when he had some criticism from Coveney this week, replied by talking about the command paper. So it was like, disingenuous in that he wasn't actually answering Maros Šefčovič when he was talking about the proposals the EU had made to them. The EU have moved on issues.
Give me an example of where they've moved.
The pharmacy and drug-related issues is one. So you asked for a specific example, I've just given it immediately.
How have they moved on that?
Well, basically, as I understand, they relaxed they opened up a period where, again, that there would be ample opportunity to negotiate what it was going to be in the longer term. So if there was immediate threat, they extended the sort of, the courtesy region over a period of time until they get it sorted out between them. So I don't accept that the EU is this monolith.
So if they can do it on that, why can't they do it on a few other things?
I think again, when to get back to there was 5 years of negotiation. I'm sure Europe are exasperated with which UK government they were actually dealing with and which Brexit minister they actually had in front of them to negotiate with. It seemed to be like, the British government would put out another paper, put another flag up and then the CEO, can we get this and then go to something else? And so it's this constant chip. They're exasperated and exhausted with this process. Okay. And they have bigger fish to fry in Eastern
Kieran,
Europe.
Thank you very much. Really interesting call there. Amanda Ferguson, our Northern Ireland correspondent, is here with me. You listen to Kieran talking there, and it's as if there can never be a meeting of minds here. He's clearly from one part of the community that is never going to believe that the British government will do anything to the favour of Northern Ireland.
I think there's a couple of things to think about as part of this conversation. What does it do for the UK's international reputation if it acts unilaterally, if it breaches international law? law. So the UK has to think about that. Then, if it does act unilaterally, what does that say to Sinn Féin, to the SDLP, to the Alliance Party, to the other parties? And it's really it's a position that we're finding ourselves in, that sometimes there's a school of thought that this isn't even particularly about Northern Ireland, that it could be about the internal wranglings within the Conservative Party, whether it's really about us at all. And the Joint Committee is there for both partners to iron out the difficulties that there are with the protocol. But if someone acts unilaterally, that's not the best sort of environment in which to try and get consensus. And if history has shown us anything when it comes to this particular part of the world, which everyone takes an interest in, finding a negotiated outcome is usually the best way around it. And the extra layer on top of that is the US is watching carefully what's happening here, and we know that support for the Good Friday Agreement, it comes from Republicans and comes from Democrats as well. What happens to the UK-US possible trade arrangement in the future if it acts unilaterally or it damages the Good Friday Agreement as American administration might see that it does? I just think that we're finding ourselves in a really kind of dramatic situation that doesn't need to exist. There are ways to finesse all of this. There's always somewhere where sort of flexibilities can be found. I don't think that the drama that's being created around this is necessary at all. And I think the high bar that's being set to restore Stormont it's going to prove really difficult to do, because the DUP has set out 7 different tests and they're pretty rigid. They're talking about the Act of Union, they're talking about restoring the Northern Ireland to the UK's internal market, and everyone is saying the same kind of language. The Prime Minister was, I think his phrase was, fix it, don't nix it. And then, we've heard the UK side and the Irish government all describing like landing zones or landing spots, and whether it's a green channel or a green lane. So it's clear that there can be movement, and the distraction that's been because of the Ukraine war, which understandably was there, is now sort of, it's still obviously a major issue, but it's fading away and the spotlight is back on. But I just don't see how there's going to be a breakthrough if the rigidity of the DUP's demands remain.
Amanda, thank you very much indeed. Well, you talked about the DUP's 7 tests. We're going to be talking to the former leader of the DUP, Edwin Poots, in a few moments' time. 0345 6060 973 if you'd like to put your call through to Edwin Poots. Amelia Cox is here with the news headlines. It's 7:33. 7:37 on LBC. We are in Belfast. We're talking about Northern Ireland politics and the state of the nation in Northern Ireland. We're taking your calls as well. We've got various guests coming into the studio to answer some of your questions. 0345 6060 973. John is in Armagh. Hello, John.
Good evening, Ian. How are you? Certainly, the DUP have achieved something that Sinn Féin could never thought they'd have been able to achieve, and that's bring forward a border poll. I would never have thought that I would have seen a united Ireland in my lifetime. That has totally changed now.
Why?
Because of Brexit. We've always been more European. Ireland, and to some cases Scotland, but Ireland has always been far more European in attitude towards...
what does that mean?
It means that we're far more open to other ideas. We're not inward looking. We're not. I know we're an island nation, but we have a diaspora, as you said earlier on, far worldwide, as you said about America. There, it'd be interesting to see what their reaction is. But one of the problems the DUP has, when they say they're British in Northern Ireland. When they step off the boat or the plane in England and someone says to them, "Where are you from?" "I'm from Northern Ireland." "Oh, you're Irish." And, I know but that's the perception. And it has been like that for years. But people in England, in the main, people in England don't understand Northern Ireland.
Well, that's kind of why we're here, to be honest.
Oh, indeed.
Because I think the whole of the United Kingdom is really ill-served by the UK media on Northern Ireland issues. It's hard.
Oh, absolutely.
Politics here is seen as totally different to that in Westminster, and therefore barely gets a mention.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, would you believe that I seem to think that it was back in the late 60s, was the first question raised on Northern Ireland in Parliament, in the English Parliament. And it's crazy, you know. And I think now the DUP have got themselves in a position now, and they're trying to draw back. And they know that the problem, of course, and they haven't done themselves any favours by on the doorstep saying protocol first, protocol only, protocol, and everybody's suffering over here.
Well, you've just done a good radio link for me because, John, we've got Edwin Poots with us now, DUP MLA for Belfast South, former DUP leader and former Northern Ireland Executive Minister. Edwin, welcome to the programme. It's delightful to see you here. Now, you heard what John in Armagh was saying there about the DUP. You must get this a lot. What do you say to John?
Well, in terms of the issues at stake, I think that you look at the cost of living crisis, the health issues, all of these things will be compounded for years to come if we don't deal with the issues around the protocol. And therefore, whilst people say we should set that aside and we should continue to negotiate and all of that there, essentially we have been procrastinating now for around 2 years. And the European Union hasn't played as honest broker. They haven't engaged enthusiastically with the UK government and actually ensuring that they actually deal with the issues. And consequently, we feel that we have no other choice but to do what we're doing to ensure that for decades to come, we don't end up in a situation where the cost of living is more expensive in Northern Ireland than any other part of the UK, because we have all of these checks taking place. And we don't have Trader Support Service providing £500 million of aid to support industry, where the haulage industry is already saying they're at least 27% higher costs because of the protocol, and where we lose all the grace periods. And when the grace periods go, then we have hundreds of people in our ports checking, and businesses employing thousands more people to ensure that they comply with those checks.
What's your bottom line, though? I mean, are you looking to axe the protocol, or are you willing to accept amendments to it?
Well, we had the 7 tests, and those 7 tests will look at normalising trade between Great Britain and Northern Ireland. It'll look at issues around where we take our laws from, because back in America they had a protest whenever UK was in America, and it was no taxation without representation. Well, we now have legislation without representation, and that legislation will apply to the majority of bills that will be passed related to Northern Ireland, handed down from Brussels to Stormont, which is no choice but then to pass that legislation unamended.
But you're stopping representation because you're stopping the executive being formed.
Yes, because these things are unacceptable, and just carrying on as if they are going to be acceptable is a denial of democracy, in our opinion.
But you were one of the first to say, when Sinn Féin were preventing the executive being formed a few years ago, the Irish language legislation and 1 or 2 other things, you were the first to criticise them for doing that. You're now doing exactly the same that they did.
Well, there is a difference in this occasion, in that we did negotiate previously that if a government couldn't be formed after an election, that the existing ministers would stay in place for a further 24 weeks. I'm one of those existing ministers. I made decisions affecting agri-food last week. I discussed significant environmental issues this morning, which we will start to process. So ministers are in place. Ministers can make decisions, and ministers can provide that support for the general public. So we're not left in the limbo where there's no ministers to actually make decisions.
And that is democratic, is it, for people who didn't get the most seats in the majority to continue governing? Most people would think that was fundamentally undemocratic.
Well, it's not long term. It's not the solution, and we don't believe it's the solution. And we want to be in government as quickly as possible. Therefore, the response of the European Union to what the UK government has proposed should not be a threatening response. We're really tired of hearing threats from the European Union.
It's the UK government that's threatening the European Commission now, isn't it?
We're really tired of threats coming against the United Kingdom and against the Northern Ireland peace process by the European Union. And they're playing fast and loose with the peace process in Northern Ireland by their attitude. And their attitude is that you can't have a border in the island of Ireland, but you can have a border in the Irish Sea. That's unacceptable.
But there's been a border in the Irish Sea on various social issues over the years, haven't there? Why is this any different? I mean, it's economic, I know, but I mean, the principle of a border in the Irish Sea, it's been there for years.
Well, I think if you look at any other country in the world, I don't know of any country where there's a trade barrier or a border between one part of a country and another. So take America, for example. You've Hawaii and Alaska. It's unconscionable that there be some barriers and customs checks, etc., put between Hawaii and the rest of mainland America, or indeed Alaska. It's unconscionable that would happen in this United Kingdom.
But this is a unique situation, isn't it? Because of the border issue, which we all know, whatever side of the divide people are on, we all know it is an incendiary issue for many, and therefore it's incumbent on politicians to come to an agreement to sort it out. Now, you were let down by Boris Johnson's government, weren't you?
Yes, we were. Yes.
I mean, he said, no, there'll be no border, you won't have to sign any papers, it'll all be fine. But he knew it wouldn't be, didn't he?
I don't know what he knew at that time. I don't entirely blame Boris Johnson's government in that there was 20 MPs at that time broke away, Anna Soubry and all the rest of them. And we had a speaker who was very lenient in terms of what he allowed to go on in the Houses of Parliament, and therefore the government struggled to get anything passed. Now, in my opinion, Boris Johnson's government should never have passed what they did, but they were locked in a corner where they couldn't get Britain out of the European Union because of the behaviour of those 20 MPs, and that's where the first level of blame should lie. But let's get into the detail of this.
Well, actually, let's do that in a minute, because we've got to go to a break. Sorry about that. You're listening to LBC live from Belfast. I'm Iain Dale. It's 7:47.
Station Iain Dale. Tweet at LBC.
It's 7:49. Edwin Poots is here, former leader of the DUP. He's a member of the Northern Ireland Assembly for Belfast South. And we'll come to your calls in a second. But just before we do, isn't one of the reasons why you're so reluctant to allow a new executive to be formed is because you can't face having a Sinn Féin First Minister?
No, that's not the issue. And, as soon as we get this protocol issue resolved, we will be straight into government. So that'll be demonstrated very, very clearly when that's the case. So actually dealing with this issue is a must. I was indicating the detail of it. It's as practical as this. Every forkful of food that you consume, where that has been come from Great Britain, has to go through checks. And I make it very simple. In Northern Ireland, we have lots of great food. We export a lot of it to Great Britain. But what's in your fridge is generally produced in Northern Ireland. What's in your larder is generally produced in Great Britain. So all of those goods are having to go through unnecessary checks, to the point where Marks and Spencer's, to fill one truck, spends 8 hours and 20 people going through paperwork to fill a truck of food to come to Northern Ireland. That is wholly unacceptable. They're expending £30 million to export to Ireland, north and south, currently. That's not a sustainable position. That will be passed. That cost will ultimately be passed to consumers. The £500 million of trading support services will be passed on to consumers. And if the grace period's ended, we have an exponential increase in those checks that are taking place. So that is why current situation is untenable. It's not an orange and green issue, and I would appeal to the other political parties in Northern Ireland to stand up and defend Northern Ireland people in this issue. Right, let's go to a call. It's from Ivor in Tamworth. Ivor, hi, what would you like to ask Edwin?
Hi, good evening. Is it not the case that via the withdrawal agreement and the Northern Ireland Protocol, that in 4 years after the signing, which is in 18 months' time, that the people of Northern Ireland can have a vote on whether they wish to stay in the protocol or not? And it seems to me that the DUP and the Tories don't wish people to understand this and know it, because it's only 18 months away. If the government puts legislation through Parliament, tries to get it through the House of Lords, it'll take that long to get that legislation through. So why don't they just troll along until 18 months' time and then have the vote, and it will be thrown out?
Well, a vote on
what?
Why
is that not the case, Mr. Poots?
A vote on what?
A vote on whether they stay in the protocol or not.
Okay.
That is an aspect of the protocol and isn't on its totality. So if you get back to the first principles, Where do you take your laws from? You take your laws from people who you elect. Nobody in Northern Ireland would be electing people in Brussels to make laws on his behalf. Where do you take laws from? You take laws from the courts of justice in your constitutional country. That's not the European Court of Justice. That's the UK Supreme Court. And those are fairly fundamental issues for any democracy. So, we're not in any notion wanting to override.
You're playing a record at the moment, aren't you?
Well, I'm stating
You're just
facts.
playing that same old record. Just think about what he said. In 18 months' time, the people of Northern Ireland can have a vote. It was envisaged just with the MLAs having the vote, but the Secretary of State could ask that all people in Northern Ireland have the vote to decide if they wish to stay in the protocol or not.
Well, of course we did,
don't you?
Well,
Is that true or not?
Of course we did have a vote, and that was for the Belfast.
No, excuse me. 4 years after the agreement was signed, is it not true that the people in Northern Ireland can have a vote on whether they wish to stay in it or not?
The Assembly can vote on...
Excuse me, just answer the question.
I am answering the question.
No, you're not. Give me
come
yes
on,
or no, you're a politician.
let him speak. You've asked the question. Let him answer it.
Well, every time you get 3 words out, you put an either, and that's fine. But you will be allowed to vote on aspects of the protocol, not the protocol in its entirety. And it is not a referendum, it is a vote in the Assembly.
But do you recognise the fact that after these elections there is now a majority of MLAs who support the protocol? And I mean, that has to factor into these discussions, surely?
Well, you see, if you want to go to a period of majoritarianism, then it takes us back to pre-1998, pre the peace deal. And the peace deal was negotiated in a way that you needed the consent of both communities, and you don't have the consent of any unionist in support of this protocol.
Well, that's not true, is it? Because there are unionists that support the protocol. There are many businesses that are run by unionists that support the protocol.
Well, there's certainly no one elected who supports the protocol. So the people who are mandated to articulate for unionism, nobody does that. Most businesses that I know of and most businesses that I'm speaking to are complaining about the problems. So you take your engineering businesses, many of them import goods from Great Britain, bearings, all sorts of things that they put into the equipment which they then manufacture. Many of those are now getting those pieces of equipment from China, United States of America, because it's too difficult to get it in their own country because of the Northern Ireland Protocol.
The Ulster Unionist Party, which used to be the main unionist party in Northern Ireland, hasn't been now for about 20 years. They aren't committed to an anti-protocol vote, are they?
They're opposed to the protocol. They wouldn't.
But not to the extent that you are.
Not to the extent that we are. And, they fared pretty badly in the recent elections. And I would suggest that they would be better standing with us.
Aren't you worried that the fact that there are now 3 different unionist parties all vying for the same votes has led to a situation where Sinn Féin are now entitled to have a First Minister? Isn't it about time that the unionist side of the argument actually combined forces, and then you would be able to have a much stronger position in your negotiations with the UK government?
Absolutely, that's one of the things that I'd be very keen to see, and would always be encouraging. And I'd go out of my way not to attack other unionists, because I think that we should be standing together on these key constitutional issues. And this is a key constitutional issue of the day. And the United Kingdom and the integrity of the United Kingdom, of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, should be maintained. The laws should be passed at Westminster and at Stormont, where they're devolved to Stormont, and the laws should be taken from the Supreme Courts, not from a European court.
Right, let's go to another caller. Ivor, thank you. Let's go to Stanley in Leicester. Hello, Stanley.
Hello. My question to you is, what if it takes a while for the government to solve this particular new approach, what they want to do now to actually change the law? Let's say it takes about another year. Does it mean that you're not going to have a government in Northern Ireland for another year?
Well, that'll depend on what actions the government take. And certainly, we have checks currently at the ports, which we believe are entirely unnecessary. because I was referring to every spoonful of food that you consume that was brought from Great Britain having to go through checks. None of that poses any danger whatsoever to the European Union single market, because Sainsbury's and Asda, for example, have stores only in Northern Ireland. So what danger is there to the European Union single market in that respect? So UK government could unilaterally withdraw all the checks from the ports, and that would certainly...
Is that what you want to happen? I mean, you basically want to axe the whole protocol, don't you? You don't want it tweaked, you want to axe the whole thing.
Well, I want common sense to prevail. So currently Northern Ireland does have checks and has had for years on live animals that has been coming to and from, and we've had a Fortress Ireland policy when it comes to animal health. But at this moment in time, we are having checks on all sorts of absurd things. So it's easier for me to import trees because we want to plant more trees in Northern Ireland for the environment, but it's easier to import those from Latvia than it is from Lancashire. How absurd is that, whenever the quality of the goods that we actually want is best suited to the Northern Ireland environment grown in the north of England?
You see, it's that kind of argument that I think people in the rest of the UK can relate to. And the protocol, I think, for a lot of people, a lot of politicians actually, it's a switch-off subject because they can't actually understand the minutiae of it. And it's examples like that I think we possibly need to hear a little bit more of.
Yeah, well, seed potatoes is another one. So Scotland produces some of the finest seed potatoes in Europe. We're having problems getting seed potatoes here in Northern Ireland over the course of the last 2 years because we're using second quality seed as opposed to using the prime seed that was produced in Scotland. There's so many good relationships between Great Britain and Northern Ireland. Over 50% of our trade is with Great Britain each way. Over 75% of imported food comes from Great Britain to Northern Ireland. And we're feeding around 10 million people across England with beef and with dairy products and with chicken products. So we have a really good partnership, and that partnership is being eroded and damaged as a consequence. That's not good for either Great Britain or Northern Ireland.
Edwin, thank you very much for joining us
you.
Here in our little studio in Belfast. It's been an absolute pleasure. In a moment, we're going to be joined by the youngest member of the Northern Ireland Assembly ever, Eoin Tennyson. He's the MLA for the Alliance Party of Northern Ireland. They have an alliance with the Liberal Democrats in the UK. They're not kind of exactly the same as the Liberal Democrats, but they don't describe themselves as nationalist or unionist. So we'll be hearing from him in a moment, and we'll be taking more of your calls. 0345 6060 973. You're listening to LBC. I'm Iain Dale. It's 8 o'clock.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 8 o'clock. A Conservative MP has been arrested on suspicion of rape and sexual assault offences between 2002 and 2009. Scotland Yard says the man, who's not being named, remains in custody. It's understood the Tories won't make a decision on whether he has the whip suspended until after the police investigation is completed. Ireland's Foreign Affairs Minister Simon Coveney says he deeply regrets the UK government's decision to introduce legislation that will override elements of the Northern Ireland Protocol. LBC's Westminster editor Ben Kentish says the Prime Minister has described it as getting rid of minor barriers.
The UK government says, look, the protocol was always meant to be adapted. It was always meant to be changed and reviewed if it was causing disruption or threatening the Good Friday Agreement. And they say that no responsible government would allow what's going on now to happen without acting if they need to by themselves.
MPs have rejected Labour's Queen's Speech amendment calling for a windfall tax on oil and gas producers. The proposal was defeated by 310 votes to 248, a majority of 62. Counter-terrorism officers believe they've now dismantled the extreme right-wing terrorist group National Action. Co-founder Alex Davis, who's 27 and from Swansea, is the 19th person to be convicted of membership of the banned organisation. In the city, the FTSE 100 closed up 53 points at 75.18. The pound buys $1.24 and €1.18. LBC weather: showers overnight, many parts fine tomorrow, but rain later in Northern Ireland, Wales and southern England, a high of 23 degrees. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Andy Ivey.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with Iain Dale.
Hello, a very good evening. It's 2 minutes past 8 on LBC. We're live from Belfast for the whole of the show. We are streaming it live on Global Player as well, if you'd like to watch us as well as listen to us. Now, we're dividing up the show into half-hour segments, so we hear from all of the main parties. In case you're wondering why Sinn Féin aren't here, they pulled out with 15 minutes to go at the beginning of the programme, but that's live radio for you. But we are delighted to be joined by Eoin Tennyson. He is a member of the Northern Ireland Assembly for Upper Bann for the Alliance Party. Eoin, welcome. Now, you represent a new generation of Northern Ireland politicians. I mean, I've been reading a few profiles of you, and some of my friends in England who take a great interest in Northern Ireland politics reckon that it's going to take a generational change to get us out of this constant battle between the Unionist side and the Nationalist side. Now, the Alliance is, how do you describe yourselves?
Well, we're a cross-community progressive party, and our politics are not driven by identity or constitutional politics. We're worried about the issues that affect people's day-to-day lives in terms of our public services, but we also want to build a more progressive, shared and integrated Northern Ireland, so we want to see progress in areas like, for example, growing integrated education and shared housing, breaking down some of the barriers that exist within our community. I'm very conscious that, shortly after I was born, my parents went out to endorse the Good Friday Agreement, and we're here now 24 years on. It's actually my birthday today.
Happy birthday.
Thank you.
I didn't know that.
we're here now 24 years on.
You need a Wikipedia entry, you haven't got one.
I know. We're here now 24 years on, and we haven't made the progress that was envisaged in terms of respect for human rights, haven't even functioning government. I mean, the very basics of the Good Friday Agreement are under strain. And I wanted, if I was going to stay in Northern Ireland, I made that decision that I want to be part of that generation that actually realises that vision of that agreement. And I think we have made progress. I mean, I'm really heartened by the growth that the Alliance Party had in the recent election, where a lot of people are looking for solutions to the challenges that we face in terms of functioning government and the protocol and everything else, but also want to get on with the day-to-day issues that affect people's lives. And the big issues in this campaign just passed were around the health service, the cost of living crisis, and I think that's the direction our politics needs to take, because up until now it hasn't been delivering for people.
I mean, when you look at this whole issue of the Northern Ireland Protocol, which I don't want to concentrate on in this half hour, but we have done in the first hour for understandable reasons, given what Liz Truss has been saying today. Yeah. But do you kind of want to sometimes bang your head against a brick wall where you see that the nationalist parties adopt one stance and the unionist parties adopt another stance, and you think, well, never the twain shall meet, and you're sort of in the middle, sounding like the voice of sweet reason, but you haven't got the influence that you need to change things?
Well, I mean, our influence is increasing, because I think not just the Alliance Party, but a growing number of people in Northern Ireland are frustrated by the impasse, the gridlock, the flux that our politics has been in. We've taken a pragmatic approach to the Brexit issue. I mean, we campaigned against Brexit from the outset, because we foresaw, like the majority of people in Northern Ireland, that Brexit was only ever going to reintroduce the discourse around borders and barriers and identity right back into the centre of our politics here, and that was never going to end in a good place. So when we had the Brexit result, we were then pragmatic in terms of some of the solutions that we were offering around, for example, special arrangements for Northern Ireland, a softer form of Brexit. The DUP were, along with the Tories, dismissing all of those other alternatives. So it is a frustration that we're here now 6 years on. The Executive and Assembly have been collapsed, and effectively the DUP are punishing other parties and the people of Northern Ireland for strategic blunders that they themselves made when they had 10 MPs and influence at Westminster. So we're now back here again without an Assembly, without an Executive. Much of my life I've grown up without an Assembly and an Executive, so it is hugely frustrating. But what we're saying is, all is not lost. We're going to the UK government and to the Irish government with solutions in terms of how we can reform the Assembly to make it more durable and sustainable, to ensure that it actually reflects the diversity of Northern Ireland. Because, I mean, for example, on Monday, I went to the Assembly chamber. I voted along with 71 or 72% of MLAs to elect a speaker. But my vote was actually discounted because it was a cross-community vote, and only nationalist and unionist votes really count in a cross-community vote. So we're putting the case to the UK government for reform to ensure that the Assembly reflects the diversity of Northern Ireland that it is today, but also ensuring that no one party can hold progress and the Assembly to ransom. It's not sustainable.
0345 6060 973 if you'd like to put a question to Eoin Tennyson. You said something interesting earlier where you said effectively you've decided to stay
Yeah.
Now, a lot of your generation will have made the opposite decision. Why did you make? Because I mean, we've got people who work with me at LBC from Northern Ireland and also from the south, from Dublin, who think, well, we have to come to the UK if we want to progress our careers. Now, you've decided to do something very different.
I did, and it's something that I wrestled with. I came towards the end of my undergraduate degree. I'd recently joined the Alliance Party, and I basically had a decision to make as to whether, I mean, I'm gay myself. Northern Ireland hasn't always been the most comfortable place for an LGBT person to grow up. And many of my peers decided that the best place for them was in London or Manchester or somewhere else where they'd be more accepted and tolerated. I actually said that wasn't good enough for me, that I wanted to stay and I wanted to roll up my sleeves and do some of the work to change Northern Ireland, because I love this place. It's where I grew up. It's a big part of who I am. And I also see the potential that Northern Ireland has. I mean, my first experience of an integrated setting, if you like, was when I went to university. I met people from right across our community with very similar interests, with an awful lot in common and with the same desire for better in this place. And I think that there are real opportunities for us moving forward to realise that vision. So, I mean, I'm sort of accidentally ended up as an MLA. It wasn't the plan, but, you know, here I am now, and I'm really grateful for the opportunities that I've had, and I'm optimistic, actually, despite everything that's happening in Northern Ireland at the minute, that we will move towards that place.
Let's say in 2 or 3 elections' time that the Alliance gets 28% of the vote and gets the most seats in the Assembly. Under the Good Friday Agreement, you couldn't have Naomi Long as First Minister.
So it's quite complicated, because St Andrews actually amended this. So if we are the largest party gets First Minister, so we would qualify under those circumstances. The problem comes in terms of Deputy First Minister, because that is then the largest party of the next largest designation. So the nationalist parties are counted together and the unionist parties are counted together, whereas at the minute it's 17 Alliance MLAs plus 1 People Before Profit MLA. So it's not a fair system, because we don't have the same opportunities. We're ultimately siloed off. Anybody who doesn't designate as nationalist or unionist is siloed off as one designation.
That's not sustainable, is it?
It's not sustainable. And for example, we made that point to the Prime Minister on his visit this week, where we said very clearly it's not sustainable to have over 20% of the Assembly effectively discounted in the way that we are. But it also clearly isn't working, because we have had so many collapses of the executive, because you effectively hand parties sectarian vetoes, where if they don't get their way, they can throw the toys out of the pram and prevent the institutions from running, and that is fundamentally undemocratic. And I'm not saying that we simply go to a system of majority rule, because I know the challenges that we've had in Northern Ireland. I'm fully aware of our history and why we have the Good Friday Agreement, but there are better ways of doing it. So for example, rather than a cross-community vote where only some votes are counted, you could have a weighted majority vote for particular decisions like the election of a speaker, the budget. We would have to ensure that it was limited only to very specific areas, because again, I don't think weighted majority voting is ideal. And I think our aspiration does need to be, in the longer term, to become a normal democracy where we do just have simple majority votes in the Assembly and a voluntary coalition. In terms of executive formation, I think we need to look at, for example, a system whereby everybody is entitled to be in government by virtue of the number of seats that they have. But if parties opt out, they should be able to go into opposition. Whereas at the moment, if either the DUP or Sinn Féin opt out as the largest unionist and nationalist parties, the Assembly simply can't function. So I think there is a serious case for reform, and I fully support the Good Friday Agreement and the principles of it. But if we're going to realise its ambition, we need to look at the scaffolding of the agreement and how it works better.
So it's easier for Naomi Long to be First Minister than it is to be Deputy First Minister.
Yeah.
I mean, I can just hear people all over Scotland, Wales and England thinking, this is madness.
Yeah, and I'm not sure that the Prime Minister was very au fait with it either, from what I hear. So, I mean, it is a fundamental democratic deficit that needs to be addressed. It is not sustainable, and as far as I'm concerned, it's a matter of when that system is reformed, not just if, because it is simply unsustainable.
Right, let's go to a call. John in Londonderry, or Derry, Londonderry, I should say, shouldn't I? John, very good evening. What would you like to ask?
Hello, Ian. It's Londonderry, by the way.
I know, whatever I do, I'm going to offend somebody, so that's why I said both.
That's all right. But I see that gentleman you're talking to. Put a question to him now. Of the vote was tomorrow for United Ireland, yes or no, what will he vote for?
In terms of my own perspective, I mean, first of all, in terms of the Alliance Party, the party position for a start is that we are a cross-community party. There are people in the party who are nationalist, people who are unionist, and people like myself who don't really fit into either of those boxes. I'm somebody who's quite pragmatic in my approach to politics. I'm open-minded about the future of this place. What I'm interested in is not an ideological, identity or cultural argument about Irish unity or the union. I'm up for conversations about what different alternatives might look like. So, for example, do we have a federal UK with more devolution? Or, for example, in terms of a United Ireland, I'm up for discussions about how would that operate. So what would the impact be on our health service? Would we still have an NHS, if you like, with healthcare free at the point of access? What would the impact be in terms of...
Which you wouldn't in a United Ireland.
Well, that's exactly what I'm saying. We don't actually have answers to lots of these questions. So I think Brexit actually taught us an awful lot about how you approach a referendum. And what you don't do is go to the public with a vague principle. Because what happens in a campaign is you have a different version of Brexit for every Leave voter, effectively. So what I'm saying, and I think it's the right way to approach this issue, is there's no case, there is no case for a border poll right now. I mean, that's clear based on polls and everything else, but it is a possibility. The Good Friday Agreement allows for it, and it's something that could happen in the future. So it's important that we engage in conversations about what it would look like, so that if and when that day comes, we have detailed proposals.
Is looking for some leadership here.
Yeah.
What do you feel in your heart, in your gut?
But it's not for me a heart or gut decision. It's a head decision. I mean, I want the best for the people that I represent and for me and my own family. So I'm not going to engage in a hypothetical about, a United Ireland when I don't actually know what the impact would be on our health service, our education system, what the economy would look like. Would there be cuts to the public sector? Would the public sector expand? There are so many unknowns. And what I'm saying very clearly is I'm up for a conversation about all of that. I want to know the answers to those questions, but I will take a position when there is a proposition.
I said in the last hour that the Alliance has a sort of bit of an alliance with the Liberal Democrats. The Liberal Democrats are always accused of sitting on the fence. That's exactly what you've just done.
Well, no, I'm not sitting on the fence. Actually, my politics is about dismantling the fence, because we've had, we know the history in terms of Northern Ireland, the division that we have within our society, and how this issue has really dominated our politics to the detriment of everything else, where parties simply rocked up to the door, wrapped in a flag and said, vote for me. Ignore all of the other stuff about the health service and the cost of living and everything else. Ignore my poor record in government, but vote for me or else you're going to get them. Elections in Northern Ireland do not have to be simply border polls. When a border poll comes, I will engage, I will show leadership, I will vocalise what I believe to be the best outcome for the people that I represent. I don't know what that will be right now because there's no proposition. When there is, I will take a position, absolutely. But right now my politics is about delivering for the issue, for people on the issues that are within the auspices of the Assembly, around health, education, the economy, and that's what my priority is, and I won't apologise for that.
John, what do you make of that answer?
I think the fellow's an idiot.
Sorry, I didn't hear that.
He's an idiot.
OK, John, thank you very much. 0345 6060 973.
BC with Iain Dale. Call 0345 6060 973.
It is 17 minutes past 8 on LBC. We have with us Eoin Tennyson. He's the youngest ever member of the Northern Ireland Assembly. It's his birthday today, dare I ask?
24.
24, yeah. Oh my God. And I mean, when you've only been at one meeting of the Assembly to try and elect a speaker. Did you feel a bit of a fish out of water, given sort of the age profile of most of the others?
Actually, I didn't, I have to say, because a lot of our new intake is younger people, and I think that's important because I think politics has been seen as an older person's game for quite a long time, and I think the new Assembly is a little bit more diverse in terms of women and younger people, and I think that's important to ensure that the Assembly is actually representative of the community that it's there to represent. We've a long way to go, but I think we've certainly made progress.
John has texted me to say about your answer about voting for United Ireland or not. He says, what interests me about the Alliance is that they had a position on Remain or Leave before a referendum was announced, but not on membership of the UK.
Well, first of all, they're two slightly different issues. I mean, the constitutional question in Northern Ireland is an identity issue in a way that membership of the European Union wasn't. But there was also a clear proposition when it came to European Union membership. Either we would leave, and we knew what that would entail in terms of leaving the single market and the customs union. With constitutional change on the island, it's not actually clear what the new constitutional context would necessarily look like. So I think it's a slightly separate issue. The party from its foundation in 1970 has been about uniting people who are nationalists, people who are unionists, and people who are none of the above. it's something that I'm passionate about. I mean, I want to be a representative in the Assembly for the entire community, and we have said very clearly that if and when a border poll is called, we will cross that bridge.
Okay.
But yeah.
Right, lots of questions coming in. 0345 6060 973. Let's go to Fergal in Belfast, who's been very patient. Hello, Fergal.
Hi, Ian. Thank you.
Hi.
Ian, my question really is what is the problem that the protocol fixes, and what is the estimated amount of leakage into Europe if we had no protocol? I'm wondering, are we spending millions to save thousands? Because the big things from Great Britain can be tracked, and the small things, to my mind, are immaterial. So what's actually leaking from Northern Ireland into the rest of Europe? Is it a big problem?
Well, the EU thinks it's a big problem. That's the problem, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the fundamental is that whenever you come outside of the single market and the customs union, there is going to be some level of regulatory and customs barrier. And the protocol is an imperfect attempt at squaring that circle, in effect. We said from the outset that the best scenario for Northern Ireland would be if the entirety of the UK remained within the single market and customs union, and then we accepted, once the UK opted to go for a harder form of Brexit, that there would have to be some arrangement for us here in Northern Ireland. There are things, however, that we can do in order to mitigate that. So you can look at, for example, a UK-EU veterinary agreement, which we believe could reduce the associated checks by about 80%. So there are things that we can do to mitigate the protocol's impact if the political will is there. Unfortunately, to date, it hasn't been.
Fergal?
Sorry, unfortunately, I didn't get all of that answer, but my feeling is that the politicians should try and put some data behind this and give us some numbers so that we can understand the size of the problem from a financial perspective. Because I've lived in Northern Ireland all my life. I grew up on the border, and I don't believe that the problem is as big as it's been made out to be. And I think there's quite a lot of politicking going on behind the scenes.
Surely not.
Well, I mean, for example, you could have a situation where, say, for example, Northern Ireland was outside of the single market and GB decided to deviate on, animal health standards, for example. You could have a farmer in Fermanagh or in County Down with one half of their farm in the UK and outside of the single market with different regulations, and one half in the Republic of Ireland. Now, some of this may be theoretical at this stage because there hasn't been any
There are farms that are like that,
yeah,
aren't there?
exactly. Yeah, but in terms of the deviation, because there hasn't been huge divergence since the UK left the EU in that respect, but there's potential for that. And in terms of having a durable settlement with the UK outside of the EU, there does have to be some form of special arrangement to manage that. There's no question about that.
Thank you very much, Fergal. Let's move on to a text question from... No, it's gone off my screen. Adrian in Carlisle. Eoin is a very impressive young man. If he's a future, Northern Ireland has a bright future. That's not a question. That's just a statement of, I was going to say fact, but let's say opinion. James is in High Wycombe. Hello, James.
Hi, Ian. How are you? And great call in today. And again, I echo your thoughts on who we're speaking to at the moment. I think you're an aspiring guy. So my questions are, to give you some context as well, I have family in Southern Ireland in Mayo. So this has been an issue that I've sort of inherited across my English identity and Irish one. And it has always baffled me slightly that it seems such a dilemma. And I'd love to understand why there isn't a third option on the table, which is that there's a third union, of course, which is the European Union. And Northern Ireland could, of course, be independent and then decide which of the three unions it wants to join. I don't understand why nationalists are described as nationalists when they're not. Like, Scottish nationalists are looking for an independent Scotland, but that's not what nationalists are looking for in Northern Ireland. So I'd love to understand, Rowan, why isn't there a independent Northern Ireland movement that has any sort of political presence or media presence? Because it's a dilemma, and people don't react well to dilemmas in life. They like choices, and I'm a Democrat. I think the Northern Irish people should have a choice, and maybe the third choice is obvious. You can't have either because it just doesn't work. No one's ever happy. So be independent. You're an amazing country, and as you said, there's so much to offer. You could choose your union economically after that.
I mean, I'm not so sure, first of all, given the dilemmas that we've had in terms of the governance of Northern Ireland, that an independent Northern Ireland would be viable. I think that's why there is no sort of mass movement in that respect, because so often we rely on both the UK and Irish governments to step in whenever our government can't do the job. So I think that is, to answer the caller's question, probably the main reason why no one has really entertained that idea, because I just don't believe it would be fundamentally viable.
What's the population?
1.8 million.
There are plenty of countries in the world that are smaller than that, aren't there? So,
yeah, right.
But you reckon it wouldn't be viable necessarily, or is it politically viable or economically viable?
Politically viable, I just don't believe it would be politically viable. Would it be economically viable? I would have my doubts, but other countries, there are other smaller countries, as you say.
Well, it's an interesting thought, James. I must admit, it's not one that had occurred to me, but there may be a nascent independence movement in Northern Ireland that we don't know of. Thank you very much indeed for that. Now, Gordon has texted in to say, I heard one DUP spokesperson who said the Alliance Party were just nervous people, that's in quotes, well-meaning but naive and ultimately irrelevant. What does the Alliance spokesman think about that?
I mean, I've heard this before in terms of, we're a bunch of kind of middle-class do-gooders, and, if that's the worst that people can say about us, then I'll take it. I mean, it's certainly not my background. I'm from quite a working-class background. We have a set of values that we're passionate about and that we will fiercely defend, and we're not irrelevant anymore. I mean, there was perhaps a time where people could have dismissed Alliance as a small party with very little influence. We now hold the balance of power in the Assembly between nationalism and unionism, and we're the third largest party. So we have significant influence, and I think we represent a growing number of people in Northern Ireland.
I don't know if you've given this any thought, but if in the next 20 or 30 years, assuming that you stay in politics, what's the one thing that you'd like to achieve?
I would like to,
apart from world peace,
significantly grow integrated education and shared housing, because so many people in Northern Ireland, including me, grew up in, you grew up in a Catholic or Protestant village. I don't like that term because I don't believe that any space in Northern Ireland should be unionist or nationalist in that respect. And you attend either typically a Catholic or Protestant school in inverted commas. And I would like to see people from Northern Ireland growing up together, because I think that would solve a lot of our, well, not solve a lot of our issues, but at least expose people to the diversity that exists and ensure that people are growing up with an awareness of the different cultures and identities that exist, and understand that there are people in Northern Ireland who simply aren't like them. Because I passionately believe that the diversity of this place is our strength. We're a unique place. We're interesting. We have, thriving tourism. People are interested in our story here, and there are a lot of opportunities if we want to grasp them and work together.
Peter in Coleraine has texted this. I'd like to ask the Alliance MLA a question. Why don't they designate as either unionist or nationalist? I don't care which. Make it known that the only reason you're doing it is to get Stormont up and running again. Use it to put the DUP out in the cold. Form an alliance. The DUP used to use the petition of concern liberally. Source for the goose. Use the system to beat the system.
Well, because it would involve us designating as something that we fundamentally are not. We are not unionist, we are not nationalist, we are a united community party. And what we're saying is, let's break the system. Let's make the system work for us. And in terms of, I've heard the suggestion before that Alliance could just designate in order to get things across the line, but we wouldn't actually be the largest party within either designation. So it still wouldn't solve the conundrum in terms of ability to nominate First and Deputy First Ministers. So even in a practical sense, I don't think that would be viable at all.
You mentioned integrated education there, which I guess a lot of us, after the Good Friday Agreement, we thought that would inevitably follow, but it hasn't, has it? I think there are some more integrated schools, but I think the percentage has gone up very much at all.
The moderate growth in integrated education since the agreement has been led by parents, pupils and teachers. There has been really no concerted effort from the Department of Education to promote and grow the integrated education sector. I don't know. I think that there are some vested interests in terms of, particular organisations have been involved in the running of our schools for a long time, so there's some opposition to that. Sometimes the boards of governors of our schools here have, political representation, former councillors and whatnot, who may not be open to that. So I think just in terms of any kind of real systemic change, you're always going to come up against that kind of opposition, and no one has really taken the leap. to lead the change necessary in that regard. We have started to make progress in that respect in terms of Alliance had an integrated education bill passed in the last mandate, which requires the department to come up with a strategy to promote and grow the integrated sector. And I think that's the kind of leadership that needs to be shown.
Because it's just common sense, isn't it? If people from both communities are in the same school, they won't, I would have thought, regard each other with such suspicion as they've grown up with in the past few decades.
I'm not saying for a second that we should just sort of rip up the system that we have and integrate every school, because I accept completely the challenges that there are with that. I respect, parental choice in terms of some people will want their child to attend
7% of schools are integrated. That's
7%.
That's outrageous.
Yeah, and it isn't due to lack of demand, because Poland consistently shows overwhelming support for integrated education amongst the public. So what we're saying is let's devise a strategy to meet that demand. If we know if there are particular areas where schools are oversubscribed, for example, we should be seeking to expand the place numbers. We had some opposition in the last mandate to the integrated education bill, but we did get it over the line, and I think that is the first building block in terms of expanding that sector.
Well, unfortunately, we've come to the end of our time. Presumably now, on your 24th birthday, you're going to go out on the lash in Belfast.
I might have to.
Where does a 24-year-old celebrate his birthday in Belfast?
Well, I'm not going there tonight, but I'm partial to the Maverick, so I am. It's a good gay bar in Belfast. So.
Okay. Eoin, thank you very much indeed. We are going to talk in a moment to Doug Beattie, the leader of the Ulster Unionist Party. If you have questions for him, 0345 6060 973. And Brandon Lewis, the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, will be with us after 9 o'clock as well, taking your calls. And then we have Matthew O'Toole from the SDLP. It is 8:33 on LBC. I'm Iain Dale. We are live in Belfast. We're talking to various Northern Irish politicians from different parties, getting their different perspectives, and you're putting your questions to them as well. 0345 6060 973. At 9, Brandon Lewis, the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, will be with us here as well, so you may have some questions for him. But for the next half an hour, we're in the company of Doug Beattie, leader of the Ulster Unionist Party, the UUP, and member of Northern Ireland Assembly for Upper Bann. Doug, very good evening.
Right, yeah.
Now, you're looking remarkably cheerful, given that you didn't have the best election result.
Well, look, people say we didn't have the best of election result, but and that's a fair point. We wanted to grow far more than what we did. We put across a very positive message during the election. We continue to put across a very positive message that's focusing on our economy, that's focusing on people, a union of people. But we didn't get the result we wanted. We went down about 1.6% in the vote. Well, others went down and suffered far worse. So it wasn't a disastrous election for us, but we didn't grow the way we wanted to.
Why do you think that was?
Well, I think one of the biggest problems that you have here in Northern Ireland is the way elections are run. We changed the Belfast Good Friday Agreement at St Andrews, and that changed how we elect the First and Deputy First Minister. So it now becomes very easy for political parties to go out and say, if you don't vote for me, you'll get the other. And they use that quite effectively, and they used it during this election campaign. And fear is a big driver for people here in Northern Ireland. If they feel they're going to lose representation, they sometimes go to the poll and they hold their nose and they vote for the party they don't particularly want, but they just want to keep the other one out. And that's just a fact of how we've been dealing with this for quite some time. St Andrews Agreement was a bad agreement. We've been fighting against it since 2007, since it first came in. But that's the hand we've been dealt and we have to play with.
I was talking to Edwin Poots earlier from the DUP, and I put to him the fact that the weakness of the unionist position is that you are so split. There are 3 unionist parties as opposed to 2 nationalist ones. And do you not think that a new generation of politicians has got to come along to unite the unionist side? Or do you think that in the longer term, these descriptions of unionist or nationalist, if things are successful, ought to become a little bit irrelevant?
I think there's 2 points to that, Iain, if I'm honest with you. As far as unionism is concerned, there is a place for unionism where there is unionism which are to the right of politics, and that's where you'll find the DUP. And then you've got centre ground unionism, and that's where you'll find the Ulster Unionist Party, and everything in between that can vote for one or the other. So they find a home in one of those other parties, bring them both together, and you'll narrow that option down. I sometimes get slightly annoyed when people try to use the term unionist as a dirty word. It's not a dirty word. I believe in everything all the other parties believe in, and that is bringing people together, working for the best of the people here in Northern Ireland, regardless of their religion, regardless of their sexual orientation, regardless of their cultural background. But
But the fact that I believe in the United Kingdom, a kingdom of four nations, and I believe in the widest sense of four nations of England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, that's not a dirty word to be called a unionist here in Northern Ireland, and we shouldn't be ashamed to say I am a unionist and I believe in the union. I'm also very Irish. And I believe in my own Irishness, and I'm very comfortable with my own Irishness, but clearly I'm British as well. And I think people need to get away from stereotyping people, be they nationalist, be they Republican, be they loyalist, or be they unionist. They're not dirty words. They're aspirations for what people want in the future. And my aspiration for a united kingdom is as strong as somebody's aspiration for a united Ireland.
But do you not think that it will need a new generation of politicians, people who maybe haven't lived through the Troubles, to really bring about a new Northern Ireland? I mean, I don't know if you've ever met him, but Eoin Tennyson for the Alliance was in here for the last half an hour. I mean, to a lot of our listeners, and they said it seems like a breath of fresh air compared to some of the voices that we're used to hearing from.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you come in with youth on your side, and Eoin certainly has a youth on his side compared to the likes of yourself and me, they will have a very fresh perspective on what they want and what they see. But there's a reality to this as well. And those of us who have lived a bit, who have seen the world a bit more, who understand the realities of politics, who understand the realities of where we want to take our nationhood, still have a part to play in Northern Ireland. You can't whitewash them all away just because they have a particular view. But what you can do is you can blend the young, the old. You can blend views. But as long as what we're doing is for the good of the people here in Northern Ireland, that's the main thing as far as I'm concerned.
But I suppose what I mean is that inevitably, if you lived through the Troubles of the 70s, 80s, 90s, that does have a huge impact on your worldview. And I mean, I'm the same. I lived through. I had people in my two newsagents were killed in Docklands by the IRA. And when my producer said today you're going to be interviewing Jerry Kelly, I gulped a little bit, if I'm honest, given his track record. Yeah. And but then I thought, well, they won the election. They're the biggest party. I can't not interview them, and I would treat him as exactly the same as I would anyone else. But we've all had to move. We've all had to be on a bit of a journey. You in Northern Ireland far more than I have, but I feel it too.
Yeah, but I don't know why you don't think we haven't moved, because we have moved, and since 1998 we've all moved quite a lot. But you're absolutely right. Sometimes it's a really bitter pill to swallow whenever you have lived through some of the things that we have lived through, and some of the atrocities have been absolutely horrific, and all sides have suffered in this. My uncle Samuel was murdered 500 metres up from where my constituency office is in Portadown. When I was 10 years old, I remember my mother falling to her knees and screaming whenever she was told her younger brother had been murdered by the IRA. So we all feel that, but we all move on. It hasn't made me bitter towards a community here in Northern Ireland. It's just allowed me to say, this is what we cannot go back to. This is what we need to fix. This is the way we need to move forward. And you don't do that by forgetting about your past. You remember your past, but you look to what's going to be a brighter future, and that's what we're trying to do.
What about integrated education? We spoke to Eoin about that, and he's quite passionate about it, but only 7% of schools in Northern Ireland are integrated, which to me is, 22 years after the Good Friday Agreement, seems ridiculous.
Yeah, but that's not accurate, because the whole control sector of our education system here is integrated in some shape or form, and it's open to everybody regardless of their religion. What Eoin is talking about is sectorised education. That is, we have a control sector, we have a maintained sector, and we have an integrated sector. So 3 different sectors, and there's more different sectors in regards to our education here in Northern Ireland. But the control sector is actually a sector for everybody, for all religions, and many of them are naturally integrated by the people who go into that school, but it's not recorded as such because it's not given the title as integrated education. So actually there's more integration than people realise. And the Ulster Unionist Party have had a policy of a single education system, not a sectorised education, a single education system for over 100 years. And I listened to what you said, and you're absolutely right. It's all about our children going from the playground together to the classroom together to the workforce together, and that's a pill against sectarianism, and that's what we need to do. But sectorised education is the issue, not just focusing on integrated education.
But your party voted against integrated education recently, I gather.
Yeah, that sector. We didn't vote because we don't support integrated education. It's a sector of education. It's quite complicated if people don't understand this, but it's a sector of education because the bill that was brought forward we thought was a poor bill because it penalised other sectors. So the control sector, which I've just told you that in the main is integrated, would have suffered because of that, because of the bill. And we did put in an amendment to say that this bill that came forward on integrated education should not have a detrimental effect on the other sectors, and that was refused. So we couldn't have supported it. But that doesn't mean we don't support either integrated education sector.
It gives the impression that you don't, though, because surely even that bill was a step in the right direction to an extent.
Yes, and the point that I've just made to you is that there was an amendment made to fix the bill. It wasn't taken, so we voted against it. That doesn't mean we're against integrated education sector. It just means that bill needs to be fixed.
Right, let's go to a caller. Malachi is in Belfast. Hello, Malachi.
How you doing? Yeah, I actually used to have a lot of respect for Doug Beattie and the UUP. I'm an Irish nationalist. I wouldn't call myself a Republican. But, it was common knowledge over here when the elections came up that they refused to say if they would designate a Sinn Féin First Minister, which, to an English audience listening, basically what Doug and Jeffrey Donaldson were saying, which were prominent Unionist parties here, was that if an Irish nationalist becomes the First Minister by elect, they were going to refuse to serve under. Forget about the protocol, forget about everything else. And that's why a lot of people here who I think voted for Sinn Féin and other nationalist parties lost a vote was simply because they decided, same old Unionist drumbeat, we're not going to let a Catholic about the place. And for a British audience listening, I think it's very important that, the whole Brexit thing was the Unionists in the DUP who had, remember, the ear of the British government at the time when they were in Westminster with their 7 votes. They went out of their way to get a hard Brexit. And there's a smokescreen here which a lot of people don't seem to understand. They don't care about they don't care about the Northern Irish economy, whether you're sick or you're dying or you've got cancer.
What do you mean they don't care? Why do you think they don't care? They're citizens in Northern Ireland just as you are.
I'll tell you why they don't care. I live here, right? There was a woman in this country 3 weeks ago had to wait an hour and a half on an ambulance coming to pick her up, and she didn't get the ambulance. Unfortunately, the woman died, God rest her. There's people waiting on waiting lists here with all sorts of operations. And when the DUP and the Unionists were going around the streets knocking doors, they were going on about the protocol. The protocol is not going to put heating in my house. The protocol is not going to put
But at least,
food in
Malachi,
my
you have a National Health Service in Northern Ireland, which is more than you have south of the border.
Well, let me come to that. The National Health Service...
No, let's not come to that, because you've had a good old run. Let Doug come back on some of the points that you've raised.
And listen, Malachi, thank you. Before the election, this whole issue about would we serve as a Deputy First Minister to a Sinn Féin First Minister was all about us not coming out and saying we will admit defeat before the election has even been served. I also made the point, and I made it on numerous occasions, that when the election is done, we need to form a programme for government, and that programme for government sets the direction of that government for the next 5 years and beyond. And if we don't know what that is, we are not going to sign up to going into a power-sharing executive. What we want to know is what is the direction of this government going, and if the direction of this government is going the direction we think is good for the people of Northern Ireland, then we will go into that executive. And Sinn Féin are the largest party. They're able to nominate a First Minister. If they nominate a First Minister and the direction of travel in the programme for government is the right direction of travel, we will go into government under a Sinn Féin First Minister. I've made that clear on numerous occasions. But if that direction of travel is not good for the people of Northern Ireland, then we will consider going into opposition.
Well, can I come back on an economic thing? An economic thing. And even this week they said that the cross-border trade between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland has went up by 35%. The country is absolutely booming in cross-border trade. The Unionists, and you can answer this for me, Doug, the Unionists are terrified of Ireland becoming an economical boom place, because the more cross-border trade, the more sort of that joins the country together as a nation. Now, forgetting about everybody having better jobs and more money and food on the table, the unions don't care about that. They're scared of their Britishness being sucked away, and it's made quite clear from day one that Britishness won't change unless the people of Northern Ireland vote against it.
Okay, so your British, hang on, Malachy. So your Britishness means more to you than food on the table for the people of Northern Ireland.
Well, no, and if that was the case, we wouldn't be standing here ready to get the Assembly up and running again. And we've already said, and we nominated a Speaker to be able to get the Assembly up and running again. And I've already said, speaking to you, Ian, that I cherish my Irishness as well as my Britishness, and I'm very comfortable with both of them. And we also made it clear that we would fight the election, and we did fight the election on issues which were important to the people. That is the economy, that is infrastructure, that is education, that is health, and that's exactly what we did. And we did not vote for Brexit, remember. We're a party who said if we get Brexit, it is going to create instability here in Northern Ireland. So as a party, we were against Brexit. And when the protocol appeared, we were the party in early October 2019 that said this protocol is going to damage Northern Ireland. And what Malachy's talking about is what we have here now in Northern Ireland, and that's feast or famine. And when we say feast, there are some businesses in Northern Ireland who are doing very well out of the protocol, very, very well out of the protocol. And I've met them, and I know that, and I'll say that. I don't mind saying that. But there's other companies who are on their knees, other businesses on their knees because of the protocol. So that's what needs to be fixed in regards to that. So for anybody to say my Britishness outstrips heating or feeding the people of Northern Ireland, neither know me or neither know the Ulster Unionist Party.
Right, we'll have more from Doug Beattie from the UUP in just a moment. 0345 6060 973. It's 8:47 on LBC.
LBC. Nick Ferrari at breakfast. Weekday mornings from 7.
Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, Conservative MP Brandon Lewis. Pretty stark news yesterday from the Governor of the Bank of England with apocalyptic price rises. We all need now to economise in some way. How are you economising? What would your advice be, Secretary of State?
All of us are going to feel those challenges. In my part of the world, we're on oil-fired central heating and seeing that change in prices, so buying ahead where you can, looking and shopping around and what you can do. But we as a government also are very, very conscious of this, and that's why we'll continue to do what we can to put the support in for people where we can through what can be a very tricky period.
Nick Ferrari at breakfast. Back tomorrow morning from 7. Listen on your radio and on Global Player. LBC. Iain Dale on LBC. Text 84850.
10 to 9 on LBC. Doug Beattie, the leader of the Ulster Unionist Party, is with me here in Belfast taking your questions. Here's a text question from Joanne in Dublin. There's a huge issue with working class Protestant boys underachieving in education. What are the Unionists going to do about that?
Yeah, it really is an issue, and we've been driving this for an awful long time with our education spokesman, Robbie Butler, to try and address this. But we all know that education is not just about sitting in the classroom and getting results at the end of it. It's all about social deprivation and social economic issues as well. So we have to address this. Nothing can be done on a single basis. This is an issue that stretches right across from good jobs for people to good incomes to healthy eating to good housing, and we're looking at all of these things in order to try and fix this. In Upper Bann, I've been fighting the case for a school actually in Upper Bann. We have a thing called the Dixon Plan, and the Dixon Plan means that we have the only 2-year school in the whole of the United Kingdom, and that produces some of the worst outcomes for our young people. So sometimes you have to pick off.
What does that mean, a 2-year school?
Well, it means that with most schools, when you go to school at the age of 11, you'll stay in that school to the age of 16 or to the age of 18 and haven't done your A-levels. In this case here, kids go to the school at the age of 14 and leave it again at the age of 16, so it's 2 years, and therefore they don't have time to get embedded in that. That's the Dixon Plan, and the Dixon Plan works for people because the other people who don't go to that 2-year school go to a grammar school and get a better education. So I'm really looking at the ones who are underachieving. So we have to sometimes pick off some of the smaller problems one at a time. But this is a wider issue than just education. This stretches right across housing and jobs and incomes and health.
Frankly, it's something that affects the rest of the United Kingdom
of course
as well.
It does.
If you talk about white working class boys, they're at the bottom of the pile in educational achievement.
Yeah, and therefore you have to look at this in the round, and that's what we're trying to do, is look at this in the round and look at all of these issues. One of the big problems that you have here in Northern Ireland is when we do have an executive up and running and we have different ministers, they all work in silos. So the education minister works on education, the health minister works on health, the justice minister works on justice, the infrastructure minister works on infrastructure. But actually what we need is all of them working together in cross-departmental working groups to be able to provide for the people. And that's what we've asked for in regards to a programme for government. It's one of the reasons when I was answering Malachy about whether we would go into an executive or not. If that programme for government showed that we could have collaborative working, pooling and sharing budgets, then that's something we could support. If not, we're not going to be able to progress in Northern Ireland.
Do you think the DUP have been too intransigent over restoring the executive and indeed the protocol?
The answer is yes, and I've told them that. I understand their position. I understand why they're doing what they're doing. So it's not a case of just saying they're completely wrong. Although I do think they are wrong, but I understand what they're trying to do.
How would it be different if you were in their position?
Well, listen, we've always said that the best way to do this is through more engagement, not less, and we have engaged with as many people as we possibly can. So I went to Washington, I spoke to the State Department. I went to Brussels, I spoke to Maros Sefcovic. I've been to Dublin, spoke to Micheál Martin, to Simon Coveney, to Leo Varadkar, clearly the NIO. And to the Westminster government, and we've talked through all of the issues. Since 2019, we have been putting forward the idea that there should be no checks on goods from Great Britain to Northern Ireland if they're staying in Northern Ireland, and if they're going on to the EU, then there need to be checks. There's where you get your green lane and red lane coming from. We've been saying that since 2019. So when people talk about being frustrated that everybody is now saying that is the landing zone, and you talked about landing zones. If everybody's saying that's now the landing zone, we just cannot understand why we can't go that extra yard to be able to achieve it, because there doesn't need to be any checks from Great Britain to Northern Ireland. And I'll give you an example, if I can, maybe for your listenership across in Great Britain. Whitby Scampi fish is caught off the coast of Scotland. It's then transported to Northern Ireland in Kilkeel, where it is processed, and then from Kilkeel it goes to Whitby, where it's turned into Whitby Scampi. We all know Whitby Scampi doesn't go anywhere near the European Union. Yet we need veterinary checks to move from Scotland to Northern Ireland, and that delays it, especially at the weekends, and that's creating the fish maybe not as fresh, and that could jeopardise the jobs in Kilkeel who are processing it. So what we're saying is, why is there checks? It's not going near the EU single market. It's no in danger of going near the EU single market. So why on earth are we doing checks? But
I suppose they would say, well, you can't guarantee it won't.
But we can guarantee it won't, because we know exactly where it comes from. We know actually what boat it goes on to. We know what boat it docks, we know what truck it goes onto, we know where it ends up, we know where it goes. We know all of this detail. The data is being shared, so we know all of this. So we can literally say this is going nowhere near the EU single market. That's just one example. And it's examples like that which tells you that there's no requirement to do checks in the Irish Sea.
What happened to all of this new technology that David Davis was promoting when he was Brexit Secretary, and lots of people here were promoting it as well? And yet we keep being told that each lorry has to fill in sort of 800 pages of forms. Why isn't the technology available to prevent that?
Well, people are talking about that high-end technology, and we asked the question is what high-end technology are we really talking about? Because if you look at Ireland, for example, if there was going to be any form of checks between Northern Ireland and the Irish Republic, they've already said their chap in charge of customs has already said they would do only about 2% of the checks, and they would be well away from the border. Now, I'm not advocating any checks on the island. What I'm saying is you don't need a lot of technology to share data. You do need trusted trader. You need these systems. You need architecture. You need structures in place so that these checks don't need to take place. But the reality is, and there's no way of stripping this out, because everybody agrees that there's absolutely no requirement to do checks if the goods are staying in Northern Ireland.
Are you optimistic about Northern Ireland?
Always optimistic. We have to. We need hope. We need to look to the future. We need to look to our people. We have some fantastic people here in Northern Ireland. We've got fantastic communities. And yes, some people may have one aspiration for the future and others may have a different aspiration for the future, but they can work together. And I believe they can work together. All it takes is for people to set aside some of the wrangling and to work collaboratively. And that's what we have always believed in.
And how does it work behind the scenes, the personal relations that you and the DUP have with Sinn Féin, the SDLP?
Yeah.
I mean, because there's often the impression given that, particularly when you see some of the, shall we say, more, what's the word, spokespeople from Sinn Féin and DUP who just, you can't imagine them having a drink together, do they?
Well, I don't think they do. But that doesn't mean that they're not civil to each other behind the scenes. I think what you see in front of the camera or in an assembly is that vision that people want to see, and that is of continual conflict. But I think behind the scenes there is the ability for them to work together. I think in an executive they can work together. If you look at COVID, in the most part, all of the executive ministers and parties work together. So I think there is the ability to work together. There is old frictions. And they are frictions that you are going to have in a post-conflict society. So they're always going to be there. I have them, and people have them with me, and I have no issue with that. I'm a military man, so people have a friction in the fact that I spent most of my life as a soldier before I became a politician, and they have an issue in regards to that. But these frictions can be set aside in order to do what's best for the people in Northern Ireland.
Well, having spent the last hour with Eoin Tennyson and you, I feel much more optimistic. I have to say, I think it's actually been really refreshing talking to you both. So thank you very much indeed for joining us. Well, coming up in the next hour, we are going to be talking to Brandon Lewis, the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland. He's going to be joining me in our studio here. Lots to talk about him. Obviously, we're going to concentrate a little bit on the protocol today, the announcement from Liz Truss. But there's so much more to talk about his job. If you have a question for him, we'd love to hear from you. 0345 6060 973. You can text your question to 84850. That's Brandon Lewis, the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, coming up in a moment. And then at 9:30, Matthew O'Toole from the SDLP. He's going to be our final guest on our evening here in Belfast on LBC.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
Leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 9 o'clock, a Tory MP has been arrested on suspicion of rape. The Metropolitan Police says officers received a report in January 2020 relating to alleged sexual offences committed in London between 2002 and 2009. Tory Chief Whip Chris Heaton-Harris has urged the MP to stay away from Parliament, but has not suspended the whip. Downing Street says it understands the EU's opposition to plans to bring forward controversial legislation overriding parts of the Northern Ireland Protocol, but insists action is needed. The Prime Minister's official spokesman says they'll continue to have discussions with Brussels. The Democratic Unionist Party is refusing to help form a new government at Stormont because of its objections to post-Brexit trade rules. Former leader and MLA for Belfast South, Edwin Poots, has told LBC why they want changes.
The haulage industry is already saying they're at least 27% higher costs because of the protocol, and where we lose all the grace periods. And when the grace periods go, then we have hundreds of people in our ports checking, and businesses employing thousands more people to ensure that they comply with those checks.
Shadow Climate Change Secretary Ed Miliband has accused Conservative MPs of condemning millions of families to anxiety as they struggle to pay their energy bills. A Labour amendment asking for a windfall tax on the profits of oil and gas producers has been defeated in the Commons by a majority of 62. Earlier, the Chancellor, Rishi Sunak, said he's not ruling anything out.
What we want to see are energy companies who have made extraordinary profits at a time of acutely elevated prices, investing those profits back into British jobs, growth and energy security. If that doesn't happen soon and at significant scale, then no option is off the table.
Finland's parliament has approved its bid to join NATO. Politicians voted by 188 to 8 in favour of seeking membership of the military alliance. Counter-terrorism officers believe they've now dismantled the extreme right-wing terrorist group National Action. Co-founder Alex Davis, who's 27 and from Swansea, is the 19th person to be convicted of membership of the banned organisation. And the Queen has made an unannounced appearance at the opening of London's new tube line, named in her honour. She was given an Oyster payment card and shown how to use it on a ticket machine. The Elizabeth line will open to the public next week. In the city, the FTSE 100 closed up 53 points at 75.18. The pound buys $1.24 and €1.18. LBC weather: showers overnight, many parts fine tomorrow, but rain later in Northern Ireland, Wales and southern England, a high of 23 degrees. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Andy Ivy.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with Iain Dale.
Hello, a very good evening. It's 9:02 on LBC. We are live in Belfast this evening. We've had 2 really good hours of talking to various politicians from different perspectives. At 9:30 we're going to be joined by Matthew O'Toole from the SDLP. Everyone tells me he's a really impressive guy, and whether they're from the Unionist side or the Nationalist side, so you're going to want to hear what he's got to say. But in this half an hour we have the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, Brandon Lewis, with us. Brandon, welcome.
Evening.
What do you make of the fact that we're actually doing this? Because I don't recall any other British broadcaster actually doing many programmes from Northern Ireland. And do you feel in your job that sometimes Northern Ireland doesn't get the attention it deserves? Or maybe too much attention sometimes?
No, look, I'm all for bringing more attention to what's going on in Northern Ireland. I thought what was interesting at the end of your last interview with Doug actually was this point around there's so many good things in Northern Ireland. When the national media focus on Northern Ireland, it'll be about things like the protocol or whatever, and I understand that, but there is so many things happening in Northern Ireland, really exciting things going on here that I think is really, really good. And I think I'd mentioned to you when I came into your show some time ago, it'd be great to get this kind of thing here in Belfast. So I think it's brilliant that LBC are here and maybe see more of it. It's great.
Well, we could make it a regular thing. He says, looking at his producer, who's not looking at him. Right, well, we've got to start off with the protocol. Liz Truss, a very timely visit actually today. Liz Truss made her statement to the House of Commons today. Hasn't been received with universal acclamation, I think it's fair to say. Why do this? Why antagonise the EU at this stage?
Oh, well, actually, it's not about antagonising. It's about getting a solution to a problem that's there.
Well, you negotiate a solution, don't you?
Well, yeah,
but you don't lay down the law.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And we would still like to get a negotiated resolution. But the problem is, over the last almost 18 months now, and certainly the last year or so of the negotiations with the EU, we've not seen the sort of flexibility we need to see to resolve the issues, and certainly not to get a long-term resolution. So there is always going to be the point, and shouldn't really be a big surprise here. I have said, Liz Truss has said, before her David Frost and the PM, we've all made this point for a while, that there is a point at which we will have to take a decision as UK government around, are these negotiations progressing in such a way that we can have confidence they can lead to a productive and a sensible resolution. And if we get to the point where they're not, then of course as UK government we would have to take action. That phrase we use about nothing off the table, and something's shifted particularly in the last week or so, where we've moved from a position where the EU were not showing very much or any flexibility to actually openly saying they're not going to. And that meant we had to make these tough decisions about what we do next.
Which is odd, because when Liz Truss took over from David Frost, there was a meeting at Chevening, and all the reports from that meeting were that they rather hit it off. And a lot of these things, as you well know from your time in Northern Ireland, it is based in part on personal relationships. And you think, well, then the war in Ukraine happened, so there's been no talks or no formal talks over the past few months. And yet, without even another meeting, it seems, or not a meaningful meeting, this has just come out of nowhere.
Well, no, that's not actually quite right. Look, I was at the meeting at Chevening, and yeah, we had a very good meeting. The relationships between Marosh, myself, and Liz all very, very good. And he did come into that meeting at the beginning of the year. I was quite open about this with an approach that I thought was refreshing, looking like they wanted to find a way through this. But ultimately, the EU have refused to be able to move on that mandate to show the flexibilities we really need to see to fix things.
This is the mandate he's got from his fellow
from
commissioners.
The member states.
Yeah.
Well, from the member states, yes, and the other thing is, it's not true to say there's not been any conversation since. There has been. The teams have been talking at a technical level. They were talking very intensively through that period as well. The EU wanted to pause before the elections, through the election period for Northern Ireland. My view was always it would be good to continue those negotiations to try and find a way through, but we were getting to that point, as I say, and the EU said they're not going to show flexibility. And look, Liz Truss, I know, has spoken to Maroš Šefčovič several times in just the last couple of weeks. So those conversations have been ongoing, both with Liz Truss and Maroš Šefčovič and Simon Coveney, the Irish Foreign Minister, and I spoke to Simon myself last week about this, apart from the conversations we have on wider Northern Ireland issues. So there have been ongoing conversations. But as UK government, there's a point, as I say, where we've had to take that decision, the Prime Minister, Liz Truss and myself, around have we got to a point where we can see a potential resolution point, a landing zone that we can achieve or not, and if not, what action do we need to take to get to that resolution? And I think for the people in Northern Ireland, we need to start to find a way to give them certainty, and the businesses in Northern Ireland certainty, that there is going to be a resolution to this.
Hasn't the rug been pulled under your feet, though, by those results? Because you will know that 60% of the MLAs who were elected are actually all in favour of the protocol. So you haven't got a situation where you could say, well, if you count up all of the votes in the Assembly, they're actually against it. They're not anymore.
Well, it's actually, I don't think you can categorise it like that. So first of all the parties now are very clear there are issues with the protocol that need to be resolved. We saw that on the floor of the House today. I've seen that in the meetings I had with the party leaders last week and the ones I had with the Prime Minister and the party leaders this week. I accept there are very big differences on how they want to see them resolved. While we're very clear, we want to fix the protocol. Protocol had 5...
So you don't want to abolish it?
No, and there's always going to have to... We've always been clear there will have to be a treaty agreement between us and the EU. We've got to, and we will always respect the EU single market. We also want to respect the other 4 key points of the protocol, not disrupting the everyday lives of people in their communities, all aspects of the Good Friday Agreement, UK internal market, and of course state functions. Those 4 have all been under pressure, threat, some would argue, in breach, and that's why we've got to get a resolution that works. And I would also say, look, there is also a further issue that all the Unionist party leaders are very clear they don't accept the protocol. So it does not have support in the politically elected Unionist community. That is still a community that has a loud voice, so quite rightly we've got to respect that view. But it's not just about the Unionist community. This is about everybody in Northern Ireland, businesses and people of whatever their background.
Most businesses also support the protocol.
No,
that's a weakness in your argument.
Again,
well, they
Ian,
do.
I
All
would
the polls
contest
show that they do.
No, look, I meet the business representative groups regularly, and I was talking to
Maybe
some of them
you're meeting the wrong
just
ones.
last week. Well, the FSB, the Chamber of Commerce, the Institute of Directors, CBI, the Manufacturing NI, all of them are very clear. What they've said all along is they didn't want to see Article 16 because it starts another process that creates uncertainty. I understand that from the business point of view, but they all have been very clear with us, with the exception arguably of one sector. They've all been very clear. There are problems with the protocol. The EU package and their offer, particularly from October last year, doesn't solve the problems. They've been clear with the EU about that as well. And of course, we're in a situation at the moment where the protocol isn't even being fully implemented. And when the protocol language that the EU is about showing flexibility, they're talking about flexibility with a fully implemented protocol, which will be stepping backwards from where we are today. So business do want to see this resolved. I totally accept business would like to see a resolution by agreement with the EU. So would we. But ultimately, we also have to make sure we've put in a package in place that can give certainty and resolve these problems.
But ultimately, you were a member of the cabinet that signed the protocol, and Boris Johnson signed the protocol in the full knowledge that it wouldn't work, but it was done to get Brexit done, wasn't it? I mean,
no.
David Frost has more or less admitted that.
Well, the Prime Minister made this point when he was here on Monday this week. Look, a couple of things with the protocol. First of all, as I've already said, there were those 5. If you look at the protocol and read the opening paragraphs, there are those 5 key aims of the protocol. 4 of them aren't being delivered on because of the way it's been implemented. There were areas in there that were open to negotiation. That's why we had the grace periods to resolve those issues. We've never been able to resolve those issues. Those grace periods are still running today, although the EU are clear they want to see them come to an end. So there were areas in there that were always there. They were too complicated to resolve at the time. They were going to be resolved. They haven't been yet.
Right. I think it's about time we brought callers in. Mark is in Belfast because they're much tougher than I am. Mark, what would you like to ask?
How are you doing?
Hi.
Brandon, nice to speak to you.
Good evening.
Have you explained to the people in your constituency who are suffering, trying to keep the lights on and trying to put food on the table, that you have now picked a fight with the EU and the Americans, that the protocol is gone, that the trade deal that you've had with the EU is completely gone?
Well, it isn't,
the EU will never allow a green route into their market. You have said today in the House of Commons you've broken an international treaty, that you're going to have a green zone into the EU's internal market. How on earth do you think that the EU could tolerate that? It is crazy.
Well, look, a couple of things. First of all, that's not what we've said on the floor of the House today, actually. It's worth having a look through the statement that Liz Truss went through on the floor of the House of Commons. The green laner is for products that are staying in the United Kingdom. This is for products that are going from Great Britain to Northern Ireland. As you will know, you've got superstores here in Northern Ireland that don't even have a store in the Republic of Ireland. Their products are coming here to be sold here in Northern Ireland and consumed here. And there's no reason for them to have the same level of checks.
The EU said that they're happy to look at changing that.
Yeah, but this is the kind of thing they say that, but they've not actually agreed. We had the same problem last spring when we did that unilateral action that I took to extend the grace periods with David Frost, was because, and the EU at the time sort of said, look, we this is all sensible stuff, we need to do it by agreement. Well, you have to actually agree to do it by agreement.
But they keep saying that they have made lots of suggestions and you've knocked them all back.
Well, see, I would contest that, and for a couple of reasons.
So
one is,
lying.
First of all, the flexibilities they are talking about are flexibilities within a fully implemented protocol. So that's a backward step from where we are today. They haven't fully engaged, and let's be clear, it's not just the EU offer in October from last year that was on the table. There's our command paper from July last year, which they have not engaged on. They want to engage purely on their terms, on their unilateral offer,
you kind
if you
of
like.
want to engage on your terms.
We always said we were happy to engage across the board, and Liz Truss has been clear about that.
Versus nationalists. It's the EU versus Britain, isn't it?
Well, look, I can't speak for why the EU is refusing to show flexibility on it. What we have seen from the EU is an offer that doesn't solve the problems. So there's no good saying we're showing flexibility, but it doesn't solve the problem. We've got to find a way to solve the problems. That's what we set out in the command paper last year. That's what we're setting out now, and we're doing so, and we've setting this out in a way that doesn't put the single market at risk at all. And it hasn't been at risk, actually, through this period, but it will allow those products to move between Great Britain and Northern Ireland in the way they should be able to do for products that are staying and being consumed in the UK.
All right, Mark, thank you very much. Let's go to Chris in Richmond. Chris, hi. Chris,
I'm here. Did Boris Johnson not read the Northern Ireland Protocol, or did he deliberately mislead us when he talked about this being an oven-ready Brexit deal in 2019?
Well, of course, there's two parts to the... look, thanks to Chris, but there's two parts to the Brexit deal we've done. There's the wider TCA agreement, which is working well, and even the governance measures and that which came after the protocol, of course, work very, very well. And one of the things we've suggested is actually the governance measures for that would work better if we replace what's in the protocol with those. They're things the EU is working with us on in terms of the TCA, and everybody's very happy with. They've not even accepted doing that, which is a rather odd position to take. And as I just said to Iain, actually, look, if you look at the protocol itself, there is two parts to it. There's the vision of what it's intending to do, what it's aiming to do, and there's the implementation of it. And in terms of what it's aiming to do, those 5 key areas that I've outlined, 4 of those are not being delivered on. The actions of the EU are undermining 4 of the 5 key things, everything except the single market of the EU, which we also respect and we would continue to ensure we deliver on for them. But we've got to get the implementation right. And much of that implementation, as I say, was set out in such a way that there was facility in the protocol, that it accepted that it was going to be revised and changed and updated as time moves on. Also, some of the implementation areas were left very vague and some weren't actually resolved. That's why we had the grace periods. Those are things that still haven't been resolved as of today.
Chris?
I think you're being very disingenuous. You talked about lack of flexibility, right? Pharmaceutical industry I work in, one of the biggest exports from this country. The European Union has changed its laws so there is free passage of movement of those products between GB and NI. Didn't mention that in your speech today. Didn't mention that, Liz Truss, either. Secondly, Boris Johnson told Sophie Ridge on Sky News 2019 or early 2020 that there would be no checks between GB and Northern Ireland or the other way around. He lied to people, Brandon. Surely by now you must be able to admit that. It is plain as the eye can see that there are checks. And if a Prime Minister of this country can't even be straight with people like that, I don't understand how you can possibly work for him in this cabinet. I don't understand how you can work for such a lying leader.
Well, look,
I
first
really
of all,
don't. I couldn't.
Okay, all right, Chris.
Okay, well, look, obviously you're entitled to your opinion. I don't see it that way. Look, first of all, there are checks. That's part of the problem we've got.
But he promised
There's always
wouldn't
been.
be. That's the thing. That's why he thinks he's lied.
Well, as I say, if you look at what the protocol outlines in terms of how the implementation was set out, there are a lot of areas there to be resolved after the fact. That's why we had the grace periods, and we still haven't been able to resolve those issues. It was never envisaged to have the level of checks that the EU are requiring. I say some of the data they're saying they need, we are supplying. I mean, you were talking to Doug earlier about the potential for technology to do things. People talked about that, but that is there. One of the frustrations I have, I've said to the Irish Foreign Minister and to Maroš Šefčovič as well when I've spoken to him, even last year, there is products out there that are in use by companies that resolve these issues, and it's worth seeing a demo of it. As far as I'm aware, as of today, they still haven't even done that. The answers are there.
But they're saying that you haven't provided the data that was promised.
Well, in fact, we have spent hundreds of millions of pounds setting up schemes to show that this can work, with both the Trusted Trader scheme and more recently the task force who work in the Foreign Office have made this data available. And what we're saying going forward is this data will be available in real time to the EU. As I understand it, they've not dipped into the data we've made available already, so that we can make this easier for them to have that confidence that those products
basically
aren't going into the
EU. Let's
EU.
cut to the chase. They're not interested in renegotiating this. Their line is, well, you signed this, so you've got to implement it. Our single market is inviolable, and therefore you're just going to have to suck it up. They're not interested in it. So you are, in the end, you are going to have to introduce this legislation, aren't you?
Well, if they don't, as we said, if they don't negotiate and they don't show that flexibility, yes, we will, because we have got to resolve this issue.
And that would then, that
and
goes
I would
back
just
to the
say,
first call. That would trigger a trade war.
Well, not necessarily.
British consumers would face higher prices.
Not necessarily, because the other thing we can show the EU, and we're very clear about, is this is not putting the EU single market at risk. It's not been at risk at any point in the last 18 months.
Well, at least they say it is.
But if you look at the amount of trade between Northern Ireland and Great Britain and how much moves into the EU through the Republic of Ireland, it just isn't at risk. But the technology is there to give confidence about that. The data is there. We can show the EU that. And I would just say to the last caller from Richmond, in the pharmaceutical industry, look, it is fair to say the EU have changed law around pharmaceuticals as part of the offer they've made to us. But what they've offered doesn't actually fully solve the problem, particularly now we're in a pandemic era, as we want to make sure, as a UK government, we can make sure that if there are new supplies for cancer drugs, obviously for pandemic drugs as they come through, that we can supply those to people in Northern Ireland. The offer from the EU at the moment, even with their changes, doesn't fully satisfy that.
But what about the fact that 2% of EU trade goes between Northern Ireland and Southern Ireland, and yet 20% of the checks that are made, or 20% of the paperwork, I think, is now over that border.
That sort of highlights the problem.
Well, it does highlight the problem, but it's a problem caused by the fact that your government signed up to it.
Look, I think first of all, this, just to be factually correct, this is 20% of the checks between Great Britain and Northern Ireland is the estimate of what it would be if there was a fully implemented protocol. We haven't got a fully implemented protocol at the moment, but it is right. That is a fundamental example.
But you did sign up for that.
Yeah, but as I say, if you look at what we signed up for, there is this conflict between what the protocol says it's going to achieve. The protocol says it will respect the internal market of the UK. That clearly isn't happening at the moment. So we need to rectify that. It is disrupting the lives of people in their communities. You know, the Prime Minister met with the Jewish community here in Belfast just the other day, and I've met them before myself. They can't technically practice their religion because of how the EU wants to implement these rules. We can't even move, if we wanted to, the trees that we're planting for the Queen's Jubilee from Great Britain to Northern Ireland to plant, because the EU think that puts the EU single market at risk. Well, we've got the new Game of Thrones studio tour here. It's brilliant, well worth going to see while you're here. But that's the last time I saw trees uproot and walk across a border. That's the kind of thing we're having to deal with the EU.
I suspect you've used that line before. Right, we need to go to a break. Time has run away with us. It's 19 minutes past 9.
This is LBC. Iain Dale on LBC. Text 84850.
21 minutes past 9. Brandon Lewis, the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, is with us. He's taking your calls. Let's go to John, who's in Dublin. Hello, John.
Hi, Ian. How are you? Thank you for having me on.
Thank you.
I'm a regular listener.
Fantastic.
I suppose the first comment I would make is that I think we can all agree that politicians from time to time will be circumspect and will spin the truth to their own agenda. But
what a cynical person you are, John.
However, I think that there's a level of mendacity from the current Tory government that is truly shocking and, to my mind, unprecedented in British politics. I think Boris not alone has he lied to the Unionists in the first instance, but I think that he's also disingenuous with the other political parties. And then we have Liz Truss in the House of Parliament today saying that all parties want the protocol gone, which is fairly untrue. The DUP wants it gone.
Hang on there, John.
Sorry, John, that's not what she said.
She did say that. I heard her say it myself.
She didn't say they all want it gone. They wanted it changed.
She did.
Every single party leader has, in one form or another, asked for changes to the protocol.
Corey, who's in London, listen back to that clip, because my recollection was she said that they all want it gone.
Well, they've all asked for various, and as I said at the beginning of the interview, various levels of views about it, but they've all asked for changes, whether it's the Alliance Party, Sinn Féin, even SDLP, and certainly obviously the Unionist parties, both UUP, DUP, and obviously TUV as well. They have a stronger view about they would like to see it gone, but all of them have said there needs to be change to the protocol.
John, continue.
I don't think there's anybody arguing that the protocol is not working as efficiently as everybody would like to see it working. I think that a large proportion of business is supportive of the protocol, but again, they would like some tweaks made to it as well. But I think the only party that actually wants it gone is the DUP. And my concern is that, to be frank, that because this is not a new thing from Boris and from Liz, where they have been less than truthful and been less than honest, and have not dealt in good faith with either the European Union, or for that matter, with the local politicians in Northern Ireland. I think you've made a bad situation far, far worse. And the problem is that nobody will believe what you say going forward. And I think that's very regrettable. But that is the position that you put the politicians in, both in Europe and in Northern Ireland.
That's a fair point, isn't it? Because we know that Macron just says he can't deal with Boris because he can't trust him to carry through. And there have been too many incidences of where Boris Johnson has promised one thing and then done exactly the opposite.
I think there's 2 points I made. One is, as I say, if you look at what the protocol set out, what the EU agreed in the protocol, I think we also need to... everybody talks about what we are doing to try and rectify the protocol and whether they're happy about us taking action without working by agreement. We've tried very, very hard over the last 12, 18 months, arguably now, to get some kind of agreement with the EU. We've just not been able to do that. And as the government of the United Kingdom, there's a point where we have to make decisions about taking action to repair those issues within the protocol. But I think I would also point to the fact that the reason we've got some of these issues is the things that we agreed in the protocol itself, those core 4 or 5 points we agreed with the EU, are not being delivered upon. So it is right that we look at saying, well, that isn't being delivered on. That's what we all agreed the protocol was there to do, and it simply isn't doing it. In fact, if anything, that many people were arguing at the time, the EU were using this point last year, the protocol was there to uphold and defend the Good Friday Agreement, is actually the thing that's putting it most at risk at the moment. Many people would argue that. So it is right. There's a point where we have to make decisions. It's right that the UK Prime Minister does that. From my point of view as the Northern Ireland Secretary, what I want to see is an outcome that means that those businesses in Northern Ireland have this ability to trade as part of the UK, but also to be able to trade with the EU. That gives us a unique opportunity in Northern Ireland to promote and sell around the world in a unique way and build on the phenomenal success that we're seeing in Northern Ireland.
When you have meetings with people in the European Commission, with Simon Coveney, Micheál Martin, can you honestly look me in the eye and say that they've never, ever raised the issue of trust?
Oh, look, yeah, I don't disagree that they'll raise an issue. I'll make the same point, as I say, as I've just said with the EU. Look, we've got to look at what is it the protocol is looking to deliver on. The EU's requirements around implementation, some which, as I say, if you look at the protocol itself, it is either vague on or doesn't resolve. doing that in a way that breaches 4 of the 5 main aims of the protocol doesn't work. So we've got to resolve those issues, and it would be wrong of us to ignore that and to, as I say, ignore the views of the Unionist community in Northern Ireland. But actually, fundamentally, we've got to get a resolution, and I'm determined to see a resolution that works for businesses in Northern Ireland as well. There are so many fantastic businesses doing great things here on a global scale as well, and I want to see this build on that to create more jobs for people in the future as well.
John, do you want a quick comeback?
Yeah, I guess that, I agree with some of what has been said. I think that, you can't ignore the Unionist concerns. I think my concern is that the agenda for Northern Ireland is being dictated to the British government by the DUP. I think that's a very, very dangerous position. They put themselves in this position. I think, I don't want to rehash the whole thing about Brexit, but a lot of people on this side of the water were very, very concerned with the whole Brexit agenda because of the impact it would potentially have for the people of Northern Ireland. And, there's a lot of people here in the Republic of Ireland. By the way, it's not the Irish Republic. The Irish Republic as an entity does not exist. It's the Republic of Ireland. And I know that some of the Unionists use it in a pejorative manner, but I'm just making that general point. But I think that I'm not sure what the solution is. I'm not in politics, so it's not my job to come up with a solution. But I do think that the protocol needs to be tweaked, needs to be amended in some way. And I think that the European Union has been flexible to date. The young man who was speaking to you from, I can't remember, who worked in the pharmaceutical trade or industry, he explained that the EU was accommodating on that. There's been suggestions that the EU would be accommodating on veterinary checks as well. So, John, I'm not sure what the solution is, but anyway, there you go.
Much. We'll leave it there. If you're watching rather than listening, you may have just seen Brandon Lewis looking rather smug because he's just seen on my screen the quote from Liz Truss, which we disagreed about earlier. And I'm going to have to for once in my life eat humble pie. She said all of Northern Ireland's political parties agreed on the need for changes to the protocol. Well, go on, knock it in the back of the net.
Well, I did tell you. I'm not sure. I can't. Yes, that's the point I made. Yeah, absolutely.
I'm going to finish with something that's got nothing to do with Northern Ireland at all, but it has become a big news story today. It's a text from Julie in Hampshire, who says, "My daughter works in Parliament. Is it a safe working environment for young women after today's news? They haven't even suspended the MP." This is on the back of the news that a Conservative MP has been arrested on suspected rape charges going back some years. Now, obviously, we can't comment on the case, but Julie raises a very valid point, doesn't she? If I had a daughter working in Parliament, given not just this, but a few of the other scandals that have occurred in recent years, I think I would have a right to be concerned.
Look, obviously, I have to say I don't know the details of the case. I don't even know who the individual is. So, and I do think we have a due process in our country that we need to follow through. But look, I think the point behind the question is a very fair one. I think we've got to make sure that any workspace needs to be a safe environment for people to work. I know, the majority of MPs, I would say all MPs, but clearly, potentially in some cases that we've seen recently, it's not been followed through by all MPs, but MPs generally will be looking to make sure that their staff enjoy what they do. I think it's important in life to be able to enjoy what you do for a living, and to do that you need to feel safe. The Speaker of the House, Lindsay Hoyle, is very, very focused about this, and I know has been doing some work and looking at how he can bring people together to make sure that there is a very safe and secure working environment for people in Parliament. It's important. It's the home and seat of democracy, and people should be proud to work there. We're all very lucky to be able to spend time in that building. We should respect that, and that means respecting each other as well.
Final tweet, which risks eating into Matthew O'Toole's time, but I suspect he'd probably sort of like this one, so I'm going to do it anyway. Loving the show tonight, Iain, very insightful. Can you ask Brandon why the UK Tories voted down implementing a windfall tax? They're not in touch with the electorate. Well, they didn't actually vote it down. They just decided not to do it. But I've sensed a bit of a shifting in the sands on this.
Well, I mean, I was asked about this when I was doing some interviews this morning. Look, the Chancellor sort of has set out what the Chancellor has to look at is the long-term, medium-term and the short-term. And right now we have got some real challenges. I don't shy away from that at all. As you know, Ian, we know the same part of the world where I'm an MP, people are mainly on oil-fired central heating, so you see that energy price hit. We're seeing the food sector price hits, particularly affected by the war in Ukraine, and generally inflation prices, a global battle with inflation now that we're seeing. So the people are finding that very, very tough. Not only have we put that big package of support in place, but in terms of windfall tax, look, I dispute some of the figures that, and I know our view is that the Labour figures of what that means per household are way over inflated, actually. And what the Chancellor's sort of set out is that where you have to be very careful with windfall taxes is that can affect investment. We need those companies to invest. We want them to invest because that creates more jobs and more energy security in the future. But equally, we've got to make sure they are actually investing. And the Chancellor's been very clear. If we can see they're not investing and investing soon, then he takes nothing off the table. And that's why we keep these things under review. The Chancellor can't make snap decisions on this kind of thing. He has to look at it over that medium and long term.
I don't think you would have said that 2 months ago. I think you would have launched a defence of why windfall taxes don't work. So, I mean, that's almost...
Well, windfall taxes, and this is what I say, windfall taxes as a rule don't work. I mean, because they actually dispel in investment opportunities for companies. They put companies off investing because they're worried about what that means, and obviously it affects their ability to invest because you're taking that money off them. That's why the Chancellor can't rush into these kind of things and has to look very carefully at the impact, not just on what it might look like as a news story today, but the impact it has on the economy. Because it's not just trying to put more money in the taxpayers' pockets, it's how we as UK government spend taxpayers' money that has that long-term impact on the money in people's pockets.
Brandon Lewis, thank you very much for spending the time with us this evening. We will in a moment be talking to Matthew O'Toole, the SDLP MLA for Belfast South. Lots of acronyms here, aren't there? 0345 6060 973 if you'd like to put a question to him. It's 9:32. Let's get the latest news headlines on LBC from Andy Ivey.
The Northern Ireland Secretary has told LBC the European Union is refusing to show flexibility in discussions about changes to post-Brexit trade rules for goods from the rest of the UK. Brandon Lewis has defended the government's decision to set out plans to override parts of the protocol. A Conservative MP has been arrested on suspicion of rape and sexual offences spanning a 7-year period from 2002. Scotland Yard has confirmed a man aged in his 50s remains in police custody. The Business Secretary says he'll be reminding oil companies of their responsibilities after claims some retailers are not passing on the full 5p a litre cut in fuel duty. Diesel is already at a record high and unleaded isn't far behind. LBC weather: showers overnight, many parts fine tomorrow, but rain later in Northern Ireland, Wales and southern England, a high of 23 degrees.
This is LBC. Iain Dale on LBC.
It is 9:36 here on LBC. Somebody said, why didn't you explain why Sinn Féin pulled out, as if there was some big mystery about it? Well, there isn't a big mystery about it. Jerry Kelly was confirmed at 3 o'clock this afternoon, and then at 7:15 we got a phone call to say he couldn't make it. Some domestic reason for that, which we obviously didn't pry into. So it's a shame, because I would have loved to have had Sinn Féin on the programme. They did win the elections, but hey, these things happen sometimes. But we're delighted now to welcome Matthew O'Toole into our makeshift studio here, SDLP MLA for Belfast South. And Matthew, I think the last time we talked, you were the UK government's Brexit spokesperson following the referendum. It's a bit of a change for you doing this.
It's a bit of a change, Ian. Yeah, it was my career has been informed a lot by Brexit, actually, and by what Brexit means for Northern Ireland, the island of Ireland, actually, indeed the UK. So yeah, I did make quite a big dramatic career move after that, which led me into writing about here and then ultimately becoming a politician here. And I think ultimately the outworkings of Brexit, being a particularly hard Brexit, being a bad thing for Northern Ireland, we're still dealing with them, and we're dealing with them today.
And we might come on to them in a
we
second.
Might do,
you
yes,
never know. But it's interesting that you've come back to Northern Ireland, and a couple of friends of mine who are sort of similar age to you have also done the same thing. Have you noticed that this being a little bit of a trend now?
Well, I think there probably has been a bit of a trend. COVID, obviously, I think has probably helped that a bit, or people have made life choices because working from home or making career moves and people reassessing what's important. I think that has accelerated a little bit. I mean, actually, kind of getting people back here and encouraging people to either not leave in the first place or come back here mid-career, something I've been working on since I became a politician here. We have a particular challenge with brain drain in Northern Ireland. We export about...
It's the same in the south, isn't it?
It is the same in the south, although in the south they are much better at getting people back. Now, the economy in Dublin is a little bit overheated, and it's becoming a little bit too difficult for 20, 30 and sometimes even 40-somethings to even rent a place in Dublin, let alone buy. But there is a much stronger economy now. We have economic bright spots here, but unfortunately we still export far too many people. It's one of the big challenges of our politics here, something we need to do much more about.
Now, just explain to our listeners what the SDLP actually is. It was the party that we remember John Hume was the leader of, one of the architects of the Good Friday Agreement and the peace process. But in 2022, what does the SDLP stand for? Because you didn't do very well in the elections, did you?
We didn't have a great election. We'd like to have done better in the Assembly election, but I mean, to describe what the SDLP is, we are in a sense what we've always been, but we hope making that relevant for the 21st century. I think we have a lot more to say about where we are now and where we're going in Northern Ireland and on this island. So we are a Social Democratic and Labour Party. We're a centre-left progressive party, but we also have a constitutional aspiration. So we designate as nationalist. Now, sometimes people will ask, well, is there a contradiction there? You're both a nationalist party, but a centre-left progressive party. We don't see a contradiction. We think there's a very that fusion is something that really inspires lots. It's what inspired Hume, and it's about uniting the people of this island in a way that promotes reconciliation, and I think that's a very inspiring message. But it's also about social democracy, Labour politics, and that's something that's very important to us too. So we don't think that fusion's contradictory. We think it's pretty complementary and inspiring when we get it right. Now, hopefully we'll have better elections than we had this year, but we've still got two great MPs in Colm Eastwood and Claire Hanna, and we've got a team in Stormont who are going to be in opposition.
She's a very good friend of the programme. We love Claire.
Very much so, yes.
I saw her at City Airport.
She was very good, and she was very good today. I think she was holding her own very well today in the House of Commons.
In terms of reunification, do you think a border poll is likely in the next 10 years? Because there was maybe 18 months ago or so there was a big debate about this as to whether it could happen. It seems to have gone away a bit now.
I think it is. I think constitutional change is certainly significantly more likely as a result of Brexit. Specifically, the timeline when it should happen is in a sense less important than why it should happen and how it should happen, and that's the bit that we're interested in. As I said earlier on, for us, constitutional change is bound up in the process of reconciliation between the traditional allegiances in the northern part of the island, what's now Northern Ireland, between the two parts of the island, and actually about between the two islands of Britain and Ireland, because part of this process, from our perspective, should be about completing the work of reconciliation between the people across these islands, because there are historical bonds that link us, whatever the constitutional setup we have. So I think that has become more likely because of Brexit. I'm less interested in the kind of, it will happen within 5 years, it will happen within 10 years. I mean, I think within a decade is probably not an unrealistic expectation, but I'm less interested in putting the hard deadline on it and much more interested in having a fruitful conversation about why you want it to happen.
Let's go to some calls, and we have 20 minutes left on the show. If you want to put a question to Matthew, 0345 6060 973. Ulf in Hamburg is our first caller for you, Matthew. Ulf, what would you like to say?
Good evening. I would like to know or ask whether you think that Boris Johnson will take things so far that there will actually be a trade war, and who do you think will win it?
Thank you, Ulf. Delighted to have a caller in. We were talking about our political identity before earlier on. I had a meeting with people from the Friedrich Ebert Foundation, Stiftung, who are a centre-left social democratic foundation. Is very much where our politics is and where Hume placed our politics. But I think the short answer to the question is I think the EU would win a trade war. I really, really, really hope one doesn't happen, because it would be very bad for consumers, workers everywhere. Actually, not just in the UK, but in Europe too. But the EU is the bigger market, so they would should it come to that, they would have the greater balance of power. But I don't think it should happen. I don't want it to happen. That's why I think unilateral action on the protocol is a bad idea. I mean, in terms of what's driving this, I think unfortunately we have a fairly toxic mix of hard right politics in parts of the Conservative Party. I recognise there are other people, Iain, who supported Leave for their own reasons that are very important to them, and not necessarily about hard right politics. But unfortunately, that kind of Brexit nationalism has really taken hold within the Conservative Party, and it's interacting with Boris Johnson's leadership. At the same time, within the DUP, they have had there's a particular a desire at the minute to kind of stifle democracy in Northern Ireland. Those two forces are conflating, and not in a healthy way. So we need to dial things down. We need to approach discussions with the EU in a serious way. If there are mitigations on the protocol, let's explore them. But let's not forget that this is a huge advantageous position for us here. As I think some of your callers said earlier on, actually Northern Ireland's doing pretty well in many ways under the protocol in terms of economic advantage. There are some issues in terms of moving goods in, but actually there are loads of issues to do with Brexit generally that the businesses are feeling across the UK. So let's address them in a calm, reasonable way.
But it is true to say, as Liz Truss said in the House of Commons earlier, that all of the parties feel that there need to be changes to the protocol. So why is it, if everybody agrees, and people will say, well, we think there should be one change, and then another party would say that we think there should be another. But if everybody agrees that there need to be changes, why has it become such a divisive issue?
Well, in part because of the way it's been framed, particularly by the UK government. I mean, I genuinely think part of this is Liz Truss jockeying for
Wouldn't
position.
have happened in your day, would it?
No, absolutely. Well, I was a civil servant. Iain, so lots of things happen in my day and happen in all civil servants' days. But I mean, I think the point is that with the current, frankly, jockeying within the Conservative Party and the lurch to the right in terms of Brexit nationalism, this has become conflated. And I think, unfortunately, people think this is somehow a kind of a good thing to do for the Union, to kind of stamp your feet and assert this kind of stuff. Frankly, it just destabilises Northern Ireland. That's definitely not in the interest of the Union, and I say that as someone who wants to change the Constitution. But in relation to what the parties say here, it's slightly frustrated the way Liz Truss presented that, as if we all agree that the protocol needs to be overhauled. That's not quite right. We all agree that we want to see that, yes, let's have a discussion about mitigating trade flows between Britain and Northern Ireland. No problem with that at all. That's not the same thing as saying I want the protocol fundamentally changed. Do I want agreement between the UK and the EU in terms of how you might make it operate smoothly? Absolutely. But I don't want an international treaty abrogated, nor critically do I want to lose the opportunities. Since this place was created 100 years ago, we basically haven't had a single economic competitive advantage. Whatever your view on partition, whatever your view on our constitutional position, this is a genuine competitive advantage. If we lose it, it will be a huge failing, and we just shouldn't lose it. We really should hold on to it. By all means, smooth some of the trade flows, but let's not lose the advantage.
Ulf, would you like to come back?
Yes, you didn't answer my first question. Do you think Boris Johnson is actually going to do it? I personally think he won't. He will blink like the last time. A nasty part of my personality regrets that. Part of me wants to see it duked out.
Well, I think, sorry if I didn't answer the first part. I mean, I think it'll depend on the external circumstances. I think Boris Johnson has a tendency to do what suits him at any particular moment in time. If there is something else external happening that means he doesn't want a trade war, and by the way, that might be the full force of a cost of living crisis hitting families, workers, consumers across the UK later this year. He will, I think, probably make an unavoidable decision around avoiding a trade war. If it suits him, he might just press go on it. I really, really hope he doesn't, but unfortunately it'll depend on what suits his political needs at any given moment.
Ulf, thank you very much indeed. We'll come to more of your calls in just a moment. 0345 6060 973. It's 9:46 on LBC.
Coming up at 10 on LBC, Tom Swarbrick.
An inquiry is called for into whether petrol suppliers are routinely ripping off customers as one Tory MP suggests laws to stop energy firms cutting people off. Should the state regulate them more?
Tom Swarbrick on LBC. This is LBC with Iain Dale. Call 0345 6060 973.
It's 9:49. We have Matthew O'Toole with us, SDLP MLA for Belfast South. Let's go to another caller. It's George in Belfast. Hello, George.
Hello, Ed. Hello, Matthew.
Hi.
Hi, George.
How you doing?
All right.
The DUP before the election were asked by Mark Carruthers several times, in fact, on television, if they would enter the executive should Sinn Féin win more seats and become First Minister. Now, Sinn Féin have won the election, and surprise, surprise, the DUP are not entering the executive. The point is, it's quite a few people consider it's a ploy of the DUP, and what they really want to do now is bring the executive down. Now, is there any steps that can be taken to avoid that? And will the British government accept that?
Well, I mean, I think, first of all, you're right, George, that one of the things that shaped the election was the fact that the DUP refused to confirm whether they would serve under a Sinn Féin First Minister. Now, that the distinction between First and Deputy First Minister is largely symbolic, but of course symbolism is in the eye of the beholder, and the DUP, in refusing to confirm they would serve under a nationalist First Minister, as I say, the titles are, it's only the title, but they created the symbolism around it, and having done that, they've now created a situation where they're refusing to serve, which is wholly anti-democratic.
But that's not because of Sinn Féin, that's because of the protocol.
Well, I mean, the protocol is clearly one of their concerns. They clearly don't like the protocol. but they refused during the election campaign to confirm whether they would serve in an executive under a Sinn Féin First Minister, which which became a particular hot topic during the election campaign. And I mean, I can be honest with you, that wasn't a good thing for my party, because it created a sense among even some fairly middle of the road nationalists that, well, hang on, these people are behaving appallingly. They're echoing some of the darker days of how people who aren't unionist were perhaps treated in decades gone past. So unfortunately it did create a very unhelpful context in which the election happened. Now, they say that they will, once the protocol is dealt with, although, as we heard earlier on, they aren't clear about what they mean with the protocol being dealt with, that they will nominate a deputy First Minister. But the problem is they've now created this context where there's a huge amount of lack of trust around the DUP's intentions and their motives. So fundamentally, we have a cost of living crisis. We have the worst waiting lists in the UK. More than a quarter of the population here is on a waiting list. I mean, this is sort of unfathomable numbers. If this was happening across the water in England or south of the border, people would be out in the streets complaining about it. And the DUP think over a protocol which, yes, some unionist voters don't like, but ultimately is not just a second order concern, but about a 10th or 11th order concern for most voters, including bluntly most unionist voters. They think that it's a reasonable position to stay out of government. It's just not. So I'm afraid the DUP is behaving absolutely abominably on this, and in a sense,
there's nothing that you or anyone else can do, is there?
Well, in one sense, it is up to the DUP at the minute, and so they're the ones who bear the responsibility for this, and that's what's most frustrating about it, because I walked around doorsteps, hundreds, maybe more than 1,000, maybe 2,000. I didn't count how many, but countless doorsteps over the 6 weeks of the election campaign. And there's a huge amount of contempt at the anti-democratic idea that people would put themselves up for election and then refuse to confirm whether they'd serve, and now they're not serving. I think however long it takes the DUP to get back into government, and by the way, not even just government, at the minute we can't even sit as an assembly in kind of shadow form and ask questions of ministers or have debate motions. They're not even allowing that to happen. Like, they've just done so much damage to the credibility of democracy. It's really, really...
And as Edwin Poots told us earlier, which I have to say I didn't know, the ministers from essentially, I'll say, the previous administration, for want of a better term, they continue to serve.
He's still agriculture minister. We declined to renominate. As you pointed out earlier on, we lost a few seats in this election. One of them was our serving minister, Nicola Mallon, a very fine public servant. In that context, and we won't be entitled to a minister, so we'll be in opposition going forward should the UP allow an executive to be formed. We decline to renominate, in part because the election has to have consequences, and our way of saying the election has to have consequences is that we're going to decline to give the DUP cover and renominate a minister to kind of, to go in and pretend the fort is being held properly in the absence of a proper government. So, I mean, they're in this... if Edwin was saying that to you as a kind of, well, they're still caretaker ministers, so that's fine, things are being... What a preposterous position to be in for him. What, frankly, an anti-democratic...
It could go on for 20 years.
It could go on for years and years. Well, the current legislation would provide there's another election later in the year. I personally think that would be a disaster to have to go back. I think it would be bad for the DUP because people would be furious for them, but I just think it would be deep. I mean, what we're doing now is we're really pushing at the bounds of people's patience with our institutions and with our politics here. Whatever people's constitutional perspectives, bluntly, it's not good for people who are relatively soft, moderate nationalists, or people who are constitutionally agnostic, because the DUP, by the way, who are the ones who are the most keen on the constitutional status quo, are making the status quo miserable. I don't know why you would do that. I don't know if your entire raison d'etre is maintaining the constitutional status quo, why would you make the status quo so unappealing?
But they've now issued a list of 7 things that the government has to do to satisfy them on the protocol. Now, if there were 2 things or 3 things, you could say, well, I can imagine a situation where the UK government might do some of those things, but not 7.
But this is part of the problem. You're right in one sense. If the UK government is going into discussions with the EU to say, well, look, we want agreement on permanent easements around bits of the protocol, and as governments do, they go in with a concession strategy to say, well, we're going to ask for X. We think we'll land on Y or W, and we'll be able to sell it. The problem with that for the DUP is, because of what the DUP are doing at the minute, they're effectively ceding the intellectual and political logic to very extreme actors, very, very extreme actors. Bluntly, not just Jim Allister, the very hard right Unionist
He's the leader of the TV.
He's the leader of the TV to the right of the DUP.
Of course, we were having complaints because we haven't had them on.
Well, I'm
tonight.
sure you can have the delight of Jim on at some point, and he'll give you and he'll give you the pleasure of his company. But guys in scarves, frankly, and people who stand at the back of lorries the kinds of people who put posters up with pictures of the SS Clyde, which was the boat that was used in 1912 to land guns at Larne. Pretty dark stuff, intimations of violence, and sometimes even from certain groups, kind of threats of violence. The truth is that if you're seeding the logic of your position, the logic of what will satisfy those people, that's a very dark place for the DUP to be in. And unfortunately, if what the UK government's doing is saying, well, we need something to satisfy the DUP, but the DUP can't be clear what that is at any given moment, how are you getting the EU to the table? How does the European Commission say, well, here's what we think we can offer you that's a credible deal, if the upshot is that it has to satisfy someone who's got a masked face at a rally on a Friday night somewhere? It's not credible, and it needs to become credible for it to be a proper discussion.
We haven't got long left. I want to finish by talking about something that we haven't talked about all evening. Do you think we're ever going to see a resolution to the women's reproductive rights issue in Northern Ireland?
I hope so, and I hope we see it relatively quickly. So we should have seen abortion services commissioned already. I should say my party takes a conscience allows individuals to have a conscience position on this. I'm very strongly pro-choice. I think it's one of the great failings in this place over many decades that we've been that we haven't been able to deliver reproductive rights to women.
It was left to the UK government to legislate.
Basically,
frankly, wasn't it?
Basically, yes, it was, and I hope that it's done. I hope that it's done sooner rather than later. I wish the services had been commissioned already, so I hope there is progress on that.
Are you optimistic about Northern Ireland? Oh, you must be to have come back, I guess.
Yeah. Well, I am. Days like today make it hard to be optimistic at times, Ian. But then lots of other things about it can be really inspiring. Look, I have a view on the future of the Constitution, but fundamentally, what I'm most interested in, I do want to change the Constitution on the island of Ireland, but fundamentally, the reason for doing that is to make this very complex but special place work better. And it is complex, but it is special at its best. And that kind of status that we have, being both Irish and British, actually, in whatever constitutional setup, I obviously hope it's in the context of an Ireland without a border. Others hope Northern Ireland remains in the UK. But whatever the future, actually, mutual respect for diversity is something we should be proud of. And that's why, frankly, an arrangement like the protocol shouldn't be something that we get torn up about, because actually what it is a reflection of the fact that we're a complex and unique place.
Dean in Glasgow has got our final text. He says, great show tonight, Ian. As a Scot, I thought we spoke fast, but wow, the Northern Irish put us to shame. That's all you take out of this marvellous 3 hours.
And I used to, when I worked in London, I used to talk slowly for colleagues and English journalists to understand me. I've lost that, Ian. I've come back.
Listen, I want to thank everybody involved in the production of this programme, particularly Will and his video team, and Robbie and Corey, of course, as usual. I really enjoyed these 3 hours. I hope you have too, and we'll be back in London tomorrow.